Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Why are you sitting there? It's time. You know Michael won't be happy if you're late. Cindy stood up obediently. Sit or don't sit, it won't change anything. You have to go and do your duty. Michael was very good at getting girls into debt. And what was his sense of smell? He unmistakably determined that the girl is in some delicate or desperate situation, and immediately did so to finish the crush. Cindy came to the city like so many others for a better life. She didn't run away, but her grandmother, with whom she lived, was gone, and she had nothing to do there. The village didn't like her grandmother. She was a mean, angry old woman. She didn't like Cindy. She chased her all the time. If other girls bathed at the lake, Cindy had to weed something in the vegetable garden. She could only bathe in the evening. Usually, after all the work was done, Grandma would say, "Go to the lake, rinse yourself, or the laundry is often washed, it will spoil." Cindy obediently took a towel and went for a swim. The mosquitoes were chasing her in clouds, and she had to dive every now and then to keep them away. But she was happy. Her body seemed to calm down from the heat and from fatigue. Grandma was gone when Cindy turned 17. Cindy didn't shed a tear, and a week later, after collecting all the money she had in the house, which was not a small amount, she closed the house and went to town. True, the box with large earrings and ring, which grandmother wore on holidays to take with her, did not become. She hid them in the basement, let them lie. When she settled down, she would come back for them, let the memory be. They were made of some cheap material, like silver, but obviously something else. Her grandmother would never splurge on expensive ones. Cindy was a serious girl, and you had to thank her grandmother for that. She wasn't afraid of any work, because she knew how to do everything. She was going to the city for a reason. Cindy was going to study. She calculated everything. For the first time she will have enough, and then she will find some part-time work. She will definitely find it, but everything went completely wrong. When she arrived in the city, she was literally deafened by the sounds. Everything was so big, glowing, and terribly unfamiliar. Cindy was carrying a large bag on her shoulder, but she wasn't looking where she was going. She was looking at the town. Yeah, their town wasn't even close. What was it? As she went to the center of her town, she could walk around the whole city in an hour, and here was such splendor. "Young lady, why don't you look where you're going?" Cindy felt at the last moment that she had impaled someone with her bag. A young man stood in front of her. He had a cup in his hand, but the coffee from the cup was dripping down his shirt. "Oh, I'm sorry." Cindy wanted to apologize, but seeing the displeased look on the man's face, she went on the offensive. "You're running like a madman. You saw the bag I was carrying. It was easier for you to go around, and if you don't watch your step, that's your problem." The look on his face became such that the girl couldn't stand it and laughed. "All right, I'm sorry." The man suddenly smiled. "My name is Liam, and I'm Cindy. Where did you come from, Cindy?" I'm here. I'm on the train over there." "You're going to theater school, I suppose?" Cindy blushed. "Why theater school? It's like there's nowhere else to study." "You're not going to theater school?" "No." Cindy would never have admitted that that was why she had come here, but after the man's words she realized that there were plenty of people like her in the city. Of course she had known about it before, but now she clearly realized how naive she was, no different from the others, the same fools. "Where are you going?" Cindy wanted to argue again that she wasn't going anywhere, but she didn't. "Looking for a room or something to rent, or something for the first time?" "Well, it's complicated. Do you know what the prices are around here? I know, of course, but I'm not poor. The man looked at me doubtfully. You know what? I've got someone who can help you. Shall we? And he strode off with determination. And Cindy remained standing at a loss. Where shall we go? Why shall we go? He turned around, sighed, and walked back. Why are you standing there? Come on, don't be afraid. Liam picked up her big bag and started walking again. Cindy had no choice but to follow him. Where are we going? To my aunt's. She has a big apartment and sometimes rents out rooms. Plus, she can help with work. You need a job, don't you? Very much. I'll take any job. Liam looked at her strangely and grinned. Liam's aunt turned out to be a peculiar woman. She immediately outlined Cindy's chores, gave her a reasonable price, and simply left the room. Cindy looked at Liam confusedly. Don't worry, she's all right, but she's been in the trade for many years and is very successful, so you won't see each other much. For the first few days, Cindy hardly left the house. Accustomed by her grandmother to cleanliness, she washed everything, rubbed everything, even received praise from Vanessa. Well done. I see you like order. I'll take a little off your paycheck so you can keep cleaning. Oh, it's no trouble at all. A few days later, Liam invited her for a walk. Cindy was so excited. It's a shame. Liam had a real crush on her. She chose the best dress she could find and even put a little mascara on her eyes, which she had bought the other day at a neighbor's store. If she had mascara before, her grandmother would have made her eat it. Liam looked at her carefully. Wow, you're really pretty. Cindy blushed, and Liam suddenly thought that she had never been with anyone before him. The thought was absurd, of course, but he decided to ask. Are you blushing like you've never been complimented before? No, I haven't. My grandmother, if she saw me talking to a guy without doing anything, she'd howl. Liam felt his palms sweating. An innocent girl in this century, how could that be? He ran his finger down Cindy's cheek. Well, shall we go for a walk or to a cafe? Cindy smiled. Let's go for a walk. I haven't seen anything yet. They wandered for a long time. Liam was a real expert on the city. He seemed to know everything. The girl listened to him with her mouth open, and she realized that she had never met anyone smarter and more attractive than Liam. A week later, Liam invited her to his house. Cindy understood why, but she was sure it was the right thing to do. They would get married, and everything would be fine. She had never dreamed of such a turn. Everything was working out just as well as it could. Vanessa watched Cindy getting ready. Where are you going? I haven't seen you studying for college. You're still dating. Isn't that my Liam? Him? What's wrong with that? I don't know, girl. It's up to you to decide. But our Liam is no good, only trouble. Keep that in mind. No way. You just don't know him. He's good, really. Well, happiness is real. Vanessa laughed, and Cindy decided that as soon as she got a job, she would change the apartment. She didn't like that woman. In the evening, Liam met her and took her home at once. I'm sorry, I don't have much to offer, because my colleague's mother died. So we all contributed as much as we could, so we couldn't leave a friend in need. Cindy looked at Liam with such adoration that he even smiled. What are you doing? Liam, you are like that, and don't worry, we live in the modern world. Let's go to the store and buy something tasty. Liam shook his head. No, you don't have to. It's not nice. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my paycheck. Cindy almost shrieked with joy. He said it as if he meant that Cindy would always be there for him. Oh, who cares what we count now? They went into the store, picked up some delicacies and wine, and went to Liam's. Cindy looked around with interest. A typical bachelor's apartment. Cobwebs in the corners on the ceiling, a mountain of unwashed dishes delicately covered with a towel. They settled into a room where it was obvious that Liam was trying to tidy up. After the first drink, Cindy, who never drank, became hungover when Liam held out his arms to her. She stepped towards her without a second thought. In the morning, Liam woke up and didn't find Cindy around. He thought she had left and breathed a sigh of relief. She was certainly a pretty girl, and it was her first time with him, but she was completely inexperienced. Liam liked to take pleasure, not give it. The fact that she was gone meant he wouldn't have to say all those unpleasant, "Cindy, what kind of marriage?" It's not fashionable now, and nobody needs it. It's a relic of the past, weddings, rings, holidays. Or is that all they do in your village? Well, I'm sorry. This is not a village. Liam pretended to be offended and turned away. Cindy immediately hugged him. "Oh, come on, come on. I was just saying that. I'm sorry. Are you moving?" Of course. Liam smiled contentedly. He didn't meet anyone at home. He preferred to do it on someone else's territory, so that he didn't have to clean up and take care of things. But everything was going so well here, Cindy would obey him without complaint. He already understood her character, so there would be no problems with her. Moreover, he decided to tell her that he had difficulties at work, let her get a job on her own, and run the household on her own money. Why? It will work out very well. He will rest and have fun, and at home he will have order, cleanliness, and food. And of course Cindy, who will never refuse him anything. A month later, Cindy was already working 2 jobs. She fed Liam delicious dinners, washed, ironed, and even bought him new clothes. Liam would hug her affectionately and say, "How did I live without you before? I don't understand." Cindy laughed happily. "Liam, I don't understand how I lived without you. I didn't live at all." 6 months passed, and Cindy's euphoria slowly subsided. She began to look at things more soberly and realized that everything is not so rosy in her life as it seemed before. First of all, although she worked like an ox, there was no money at all, and even the money that had been hers personally was gone. It was very strange, considering that Cindy had hardly any new things, but Liam's closet had changed almost completely. Secondly, Cindy wondered if Liam was spending too much time on a job that he wasn't paid for. And thirdly, Cindy was beginning to realize that she was a complete idiot. Does Liam have this very job at all or not? She sat down on a chair in the kitchen, looked around the room, the curtains on the windows. She bought them. The pot in which the soup was boiling, she bought them too, and the soup that was boiling in the pot was hers too. The girl got up, turned off the gas. She would not cook anything. And after all, only 6 months ago, she dreamed that she would enter the study, that she would have a normal life. Cindy suddenly thought that Vanessa had not warned her in vain. Apparently, she knew her nephew well. Cindy got ready and went for a walk. The weather was nice. She'd have to stop by work and tell her she wasn't coming back. No, of course she'd leave her alone. She had to live somehow. Liam would see that she wasn't there and that nothing had been cooked but the first meal, and she would think about it. She came home in the dark. She had rehearsed her speech all the way, but Liam was not at home. It makes sense. He'd say it was another work emergency. Cindy sighed. How frustrating was that? Well, the main thing was to talk to him. Then everything would become clear. Liam came in the morning. He took something out of the refrigerator, tried not to rattle, and sat down to eat in the dark. Cindy turned on the light, Liam looked up at her. "Hi, what are you doing up?" "Liam, we need to talk." He grimaced. It was a friend of his, to whom Liam hadn't been able to repay his debt for a long time. He had lost a little, then he wanted to win back, but he had lost even more. Once again, Liam regretted that the world technologies were developing so fast. There were no cell phones before, and there was no need to always answer the phone. No home in that, was it? A good excuse, but now try not to answer, and then you can answer and end up in the hospital. "Yeah, Michael, hi." "Hi, Liam. Is it just me, or are you avoiding me?" "Michael, of course it's me." "Then I don't understand why we don't see each other very often. I think we should meet to discuss some things." Liam sighed tiredly. "Where should I go?" "You don't need to go anywhere. I'll come to you myself. I know the address." Michael disconnected. Liam wiped the sweat from his forehead. It wasn't funny anymore. He tried not to tell anyone his address at all, so that there would be a place no one would know about, and now Michael had found out everything. Liam looked longingly out the window. Hiding was not an option. Sooner or later he would have to go home, but the debt would be much bigger. Cindy had just come home from work when the doorbell rang. "Cindy, we have guests today, a colleague from work." The girl splashed her hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I would have cooked something delicious." "It's fine as it is." Michael was alone, but Liam had no doubt that there were some tough guys waiting for him somewhere in the entryway. "It's cozy at your place." Michael looked at Cindy. "Liam, didn't you say you had such a beautiful wife?" Liam gritted his teeth. "It's not a wife, it's Cindy." The girl snorted resentfully and went into the kitchen. When Michael and Liam were seated at the table, she said, "Well, you two are talking, and I'm going to bed. I have to work early tomorrow." She slipped out of the door, terribly anxious to hear what they would talk about, but Liam was tense. Apparently it was his boss. Let them be there and Cindy sleep. Michael ate quietly. "And you're Cindy. She's a very decent cook, I know." Liam mumbled, not lifting his eyes from his plate. "And she works, and she must be from a decent family. She's got no one and comes from the middle of nowhere. Did you come to talk about Cindy?" Michael looked at him thoughtfully. "If you don't want to talk about Cindy, let's talk about you. I'm listening to you." "Me? Sure. I don't owe you money. You owe me money." "Michael, I'll give it to you as soon as I get it." Michael pushed the plate away. "You realize this is kindergarten. Maybe you'll have them in 10 years, when they won't be worth anything?" Liam was silent. "Liam, this girl, do you love her? Are you going to get married?" Liam couldn't help smiling. "To Cindy? What, am I sick? Why don't we want her, you country bumpkin? She cooks, cleans, buys groceries. That's all she's good for." "I wonder." Michael was tapping his fingers on the table. "Listen, Liam, you can not only pay me back, but also earn money." Liam looked at Michael in surprise. "How?" "Well, if you don't feel sorry for Cindy, are you saying that she has no family?" "No." "Michael, I don't feel sorry for her. You can have her. What do you want me to do?" They talked for a long time. Michael left after 2 o'clock. That night, Liam was very tender and gentle with Cindy. She even changed her mind about the scandal because she could see how much Liam loved her, but she still had to talk. In the evening, when she came home from work, to her surprise, she found Liam at home. He was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "Liam, is something wrong?" He looked at her sadly and turned away to the wall. Cindy was frightened. She sat down next to him. "Liam, what's wrong? Tell me, come on." He sat down on the couch. "Yes, I guess we need to talk. I've been keeping it from you, but things are getting out of hand. You see, I've been out of work for 4 months now, ever since I was diagnosed. I thought treatment wouldn't take up much of my time, much less money. Lime saw the horror-filled eyes of Cindy and continued even more tragically. At the moment there is movement towards recovery, but there is no money, and there are huge debts that people are starting to claim. He talked for a long time. Cindy only realized that money was needed, lots of money, or her loved one would die. It was only now that it all came to her. She realized how skillfully she had been swindled, having driven her colleague into debt, and not just driven, but under receipts. Though if she hadn't had them, she couldn't refuse, she would have been forced to. Cindy went out to get the girls. Michael was already waiting for them. "All right, my chicks, ready to work?" One of the girls laughed. Cindy looked at him gloomily. Michael pinched her quite contentedly. "Why are you looking at me like a beast? It's not like I'm forcing you. Just pay your debt and walk free." Kathy is working with pleasure. She has found her vocation. Cindy looked at him angrily. "Go to hell. You'll choke someday." Michael snorted angrily. "I'd like to give you a punch that you'd remember for the rest of your life, but I can't. There's a very important man waiting for you, and your client is paying you very well. So I can leave you soon." "Well, we'll see, we'll see." Cindy got into the car. She knew who Michael was talking about. She had been taken to the same client lately. It was an elderly man in a wheelchair. Cindy loved going to see him. They didn't sleep, even though that's why she was taken away for debt. They would talk, watch comedies, eat, and Cindy would just sleep it off. Charles had a son who lived abroad and couldn't come back now because he was under contract. Charles was not a poor man himself, and his son sent him good money all the time so that an old man like Charles could afford it. Cindy had started going to him a month ago. She didn't know how much the clients paid. She only got a little if they gave her something. Each of them was usually escorted to the door by a bald guy named Ethan, who took the money. Then in the morning, or when he had time, he would collect the girls. Charles met her in the hallway. "Cindy, I was afraid I hadn't made it. I can't get your boss on the phone. They've invented a newfangled connection, but they can't think of one that works well." Cindy smiled. Charles was always cursing everything modern, saying it was better before. And now there's no privacy at all. Think about it, Cindy. It used to be that a man went on vacation, went to the country, and that was it. Everyone knew that he would return on such and such a date, and no one touched anyone. But now at any moment at work will be called, and if somewhere the phone sat down, then in an hour everyone is on the ears, not a life, but a glass showcase. In some ways she agreed with him, but she liked to argue. Sometimes they spent the whole evening arguing. They met by chance. Cindy went out during the day, once a month. When there were women's days, girls were given days off. Some went out. Some visited relatives. It was on one of those days that she met Charles. Cindy liked to think about anything extraneous and just walk. When she went somewhere far away, she would start a game, trying to get back to the center without questioning the passers-by. That day she wandered for a long time, wandered into some cottage community, and realized she was completely lost. There were no passers-by, so Cindy sighed and pulled out her cell phone, only the phone was a nuisance. It just died. "Shit. Can I help you, sweet girl?" Cindy turned around in amazement. In the 3 years she'd worked for Michael, no one had ever called her that. Very close behind a wrought iron fence sat a man in a wheelchair. He was dressed like he was going to a ball, black suit, white shirt, bowdy. The man intercepted her gaze, smiled. "I like, to be always in uniform. A pun, of course, but at least with clothes on. Cindy smiled. The man reminded her of some fairy tale character. Not even a fairy tale character, just an ancient one. From a time where good manners were still honored. "Hello, I'm a little lost, and my phone is dead." The man smirked. "I've always said these newfangled things are unreliable. If you had a guidebook in your purse, you wouldn't be lost. My name's Charles, by the way. My name is Cindy. Why are we talking over the fence? If you're not in a hurry, I'd love to buy you a nice cup of tea, and then Sebastian can take you." Cindy didn't hesitate. She said yes. Why should she be afraid? She had been in such trouble for 3 years that it seemed she was not afraid of anything. Sebastian turned out to be a gardener, driver, and houseworker in one person. He was only a little younger than the owner, and at first he looked at Cindy disapprovingly. Then, really nothing, even drove her to the store a few times on Charles's behalf. On one of those trips, he said, "I thought you were trying to rob my master?" Cindy was surprised, wanted to be offended, but then realized how it looked from the outside and simply replied, "Don't think so. Charles, almost the only person in this world who has treated me well, not as a thing, but as a person. I would never hurt him, never plot against him. That's a good thing. Master's been through a lot in this life. He wasn't always like this. Besides, the doctor said he had a chance to get back on his feet, except that he didn't want to." Cindy asked in surprise, "Why? I actually thought he was always like this." "No. Years ago he was driving a car with his family in it. He has a family. He did. He lost control of the car and went off the road. His wife was killed. He was left disabled. And the son was fine, except the guy got a massive shock. For 2 years he was observed by doctors, and then when he recovered, he blamed everything on his father and practically stopped communicating with him. Then when he grew up, he went abroad and doesn't even call him. Well, Charles also blames himself for everything, and that's how he punishes himself. He doesn't think that's punishment enough for him. You know, Cindy, before you showed up, he didn't even talk to anyone. He sat in his room. I even brought him food." Cindy was so upset. "Oh, how awful. He's so kind, so wonderful. How old is your son?" "He is now." Sebastian thought for a moment. 27 or 28. "And how long has he been separated?" "Since he was 20, when he left on vacation and never came back. He and his father had a big fight before he left. I heard Robert telling him everything. Charles tried to say something at first, but then he shut up. That's it. They haven't spoken since. Well, you can't do that. Doesn't he understand?" "I guess not. You see, whether it's my father or Robert, they have the same character. Neither of them will ever make the first move." Cindy thought, "Oh, I wish I could talk to that Robert. Explain, but you can't. Charles would not forgive her for such an intrusion into his private life." The first time she told Charles, he'd looked at her for a long time. "So you're not doing your duty." "Well, yes, but we have to do something." "What? Who needs me here with my claims?" "I've got no one. I'm not from around here." "I don't think Michael didn't have it all figured out." She waved her hand. "I'm not a person at all now, and I'm not going to change anything." The man wanted to say something else, but didn't. But just 3 days later the order came in for the whole weekend. It wasn't bad money, but the girls were afraid of such orders. Cindy was afraid too, but judging by the glint in Michael's eyes, he was paid well, which meant he wouldn't be overplaying anything. She said goodbye to the girls just in case and got into the car with Ethan. He drove off, silent as always. What was her surprise when the car stopped in front of that very cottage? True, she was a little upset then. She had such a good impression of the owner of the house, and now it was crumbling like a house of cards, but Cindy was worried for nothing. They had dinner, then sat on the veranda, and she was sent to her own room to sleep. It was only then that Cindy realized that this nice older man had just decided to let her rest. The first thing after the bedroom door closed behind her, she burst into tears. It was so unusual to feel cared for. It was the first time she slept peacefully, ate, even went swimming in the pool, sometimes even forgetting what her life had become. And how much they talked about everything, life, books, movies. When Charles found out that Cindy hardly knew any movies, he was very surprised. Don't you like to watch melodramas, for example? All girls love them. I don't know, I guess I do. My grandmother didn't have a TV because you have to pay extra for electricity. Liam had no time to watch. I'd come in from my second job and just fall over. And now I don't have time for movies. Cindy, have you met Liam? I mean, it's all his fault. I tried. I waited for him at his house. He was with some girl. Anyway, he said he hated talking to people like me. From then on, Cindy had an occasional vacation. She was ashamed that Charles would give her that kind of money, but he wouldn't listen. Before Cindy and Ethan could drive away, a cab pulled up in front of the house. No one got out of it for a long time. Then the door opened and Lisa literally fell out of the car. She had been working at Michael's a little longer than Cindy had. The girl was badly beaten up and practically unsteady on her feet. Cindy rushed to her from the car. She looked at her friend with a distraught look in her eyes. House 56. Never go there. It's better from the bridge. And Lisa cried. She was led into the driveway, and Cindy got back into the car. It was quite possible that she too would someday return in the same condition, or not at all. That could happen too. In the evening, Charles asked, "Are you looking a little gloomy today?" Cindy told him everything. He listened attentively, silently, his fingers drumming on the table. "Tell you what, Cindy, give me the coordinates of your Michael. You got a personal number?" "Yes. Why do you need it?" "We need it." Cindy wrote the number on a napkin. "Now, girl, why don't you go to bed?" In the morning, Cindy woke up late. Strange, why hadn't they come for her yet? Shit, Michael's gonna yell and probably give her a ticket. She'll never pay off that debt. Charles was downstairs in his chair. "Oh, you awake, Cindy?" "Yes, I'm sorry. I've got to run." "No need. Sit down. Pour yourself a cup of coffee." Cindy stopped confused, sat down, poured coffee, and only then was surprised to see that Charles had her passport in front of him. "Oh, where did you get it? Did you kill Michael?" The man laughed. "To be honest, I really wanted to, but I had to pull myself together. I paid your debt, or rather that man's debt. I was going to ask you if you don't mind if I ask him later. Does he have that debt? Paid?" Cindy was suddenly in tears. "How could you do that?" "You're the—" "Thank you." She wiped her eyes. "And you'll have to ask him. Double or triple?" "That's good." "Cindy, I'm not insisting, but I wonder if you could stay with me for a while. You need to study, and I'll be less bored." A year passed. Cindy entered the institute, but without Charles' help, she would not have passed any exams. For 3 months, he literally kept her awake. She read, she counted, she crammed. She went to the exam like a robot, and like a robot she passed. That day they had a real party. Cindy bought a cake, Sebastian cooked meat, and Charles entertained everyone with jokes. When Sebastian went home and they were sitting around a small fire, Cindy couldn't stand it. "Tell me, did you have a family?" And Charles told everything, how he loved his wife, how he loved his son, and how he had lost both him and her. "How could that be? You need to try and talk to him now. He's an adult now, an adult." "No, Cindy, that's just it. He's grown up, he's a real man, but he hasn't changed his mind, and he's never even tried to talk to me. The last time I tried was about 5 years ago, but my son didn't respond, so that's the way it is. I occasionally check in to see how he's doing. I know he's doing well, but for some reason he's not married yet." Cindy worked as hard as she could for her keep and lodging. She cleaned, cooked, made sure Charles took his medication on time. Sebastian breathed a sigh of relief. "Cindy, you have no idea what it meant to me to make pancakes. It was horrible. I spent 2 days researching each dish, and only then did I try to cook it." Cindy laughed. "I really like cooking, and I like everything very much." A year later, Charles fell ill. He caught a cold somewhere in the street, and then a complication developed. He flatly refused to go to the hospital. The doctor came to his house. Cindy looked at the face of the one who had given her hope for life and realized that she would not survive if something happened. Charles was hardly eating. Nothing pleased him, and then she made up her mind. She went to his study at night when the master of the house was asleep. She explored the contents of the drawers for a long time and finally found a notebook that contained his son's address. Not only the address, but also his phone number. It took her another day to work up the courage, and then she dialed the number. The phone was not answered for a long time. Finally, a man's voice answered. "Hello. Hello, you don't know me. My name is Cindy. I live with your father." "Is that a mistress? But I'm not interested. What do you want?" Cindy thought he didn't hang up right away. That was good. That's what she was afraid of. "Listen, don't hang up. I'll tell you everything. It's up to you to figure out what to do. Your father, he's in a lot of pain. He tries not to show it, but I've seen him sitting in his office several times, holding your picture and crying. Did he put you up to calling me?" Cindy was scared. "No, he doesn't know. He won't forgive me for meddling where I shouldn't. I wouldn't interfere. It's just that Charles is very ill at the moment. It may not be critical, but he's lost interest in life. I'm begging you. If you would come, he might feel better." The other end of the phone laughed. "Are you afraid of losing your daddy? Do you really expect me to believe you're all that sincere?" Cindy was sick of listening to this narcissistic asshole. You know what? A man who has blackness in his soul and sees it all around him. I have nothing more to say to you. You found the culprit for your mother's death, or rather, it's very convenient for you to blame it on your father, and you live your life in peace. And your father starts the morning thinking, "I wish I hadn't survived that accident. You're a cruel man, and I'm sorry I called you." Cindy disconnected and even threw the phone. I mean, really, why would she do that? She didn't want Charles to find out. The next day, Charles got worse. There was no change in his medical condition, but his mood. The doctor took Cindy aside as he left. "Cindy, Charles needs positive emotions as much as possible. You know, moping is very dangerous in his condition." "I understand. I'll try my best." "Yes, you will. Have a good day." The doctor left, and Cindy went to her room. But just as she reached it, the doorbell rang again. She took a quick step back. The doctor must have forgotten something, opened the door, and froze. There was a man standing in front of her. He was something elusive, similar to Charles, but looked much more powerful. "Is that you?" He looked at her mockingly. It's me, and this is you. Come in, please." She backed away, and he stepped inside, tossing a large travel bag carelessly to the floor. "Sebastian, where?" "There's stuff in the car, presents." Sebastian appeared out of the ground, looked at the man for a moment, then rushed to him. "Kid, Uncle Sebastian." They hugged. Sebastian sort of even wiped his eyes. Come, make your father happy." Robert looked at Cindy confusedly. "How? Can you do that without warning? Is it all right?" She smiled. "Let's go quickly. What warning?" She opened the door to Charles' room. "Charles, you have visitors." The man reluctantly turned his head and froze. He looked silently at Robert, who was walking slowly towards him. "Son." "Robert." Cindy tactfully closed the door and went into the kitchen. She had to prepare something tasty, something festive. She had the salad ready. She put the meat in the oven, sat down, and Robert came into the kitchen. "Something smells delicious." She smiled. "Dinner will be ready in 200. Why don't you make some tea and sandwiches in the meantime?" "That would be great. I'm starving." Cindy began to make sandwiches quickly, and Robert watched her when the girl put a plate and a mug in front of him, said, "Well, tell me, Cindy, what are you doing in my father's house? That you're here out of the goodness of your heart, I don't need to tell you. I haven't believed in human souls for a long time." Cindy shrugged her shoulders. "That's your right. Everyone believes what they want to believe. But will you tell me you're not trying to marry my father?" "Marry Charles? Are you out of your mind?" Cindy immediately recognized that Robert was very handsome, probably spoiled by women's attention, and no wonder, but the way he behaved, the things he said, just repulsed her. He was so nasty. Why, a lot of girls your age only dream of such a husband. He's got money, but well, you know. Cindy, leaning over to him, was just bursting with anger. "No, I don't understand. I don't understand the intricate plans and actions that are brewing in your sick brain. And please remember, I'm here because I'm very grateful to your father. He has helped me a lot in my life. You're a completely unreliable person, so I'll be with Charles until he kicks me out. Is that clear?" Robert looked at her in a kind of admiration. "It's clear. You just don't get to swinging your fists, or your eyes will be so glittering that you'll be impossible to handle." Cindy straightened up and walked out of the kitchen shaking. What a narcissist. What kind of a narcissist who thinks he knows everything? How could Charles, the smartest and kindest man in the world, have such a son? She looked into the room. Charles was asleep. On his lips was a smile. She smiled too and quietly closed the door. In the evening, Charles even sat at the table for a while, ate a little, which Cindy was terribly pleased about. The conversation was mostly between Robert and her father. So Cindy cleared the table, said good night to everyone, and went to bed. She had to go to the institute in the morning. She left when everyone was still asleep. The day flew by unnoticed. If earlier Cindy had been worried that Charles might need her help, now she was calm. She said goodbye to her classmates and headed toward home. "Oh, what people, Cindy?" She jerked and turned around. Lion was standing in front of her. Dan, that was someone she never wanted to see in her life. To be honest, she didn't think she ever would. The city was huge, just huge. You could live here all your life and never meet him. She turned away and wanted to leave, but Liam grabbed her arm. "Where are you going, chick? You owe me something." Cindy tried to pull her hand away. "I don't. You owe me something." "Let go." "But how can I let you go? It's not fair. You have a good life and I have a bad one. Who picked you up? Who made you a town? You're a shitty village." Cindy yanked her arm away and Liam let go of her, and she fell. She hit her elbow so hard that tears came out of her eyes. And at the same moment, someone picked her up and put her on her feet, and then she saw Liam's shoes fly up. Or rather, it was he who flew down, and the feet in his boots flew up. And then she saw Robert's face in front of her. "Are you okay?" "I am." "Why are you here?" "Oh, well, thanks a lot. Let's get in the car." Cindy let him drive her to the car, and when he closed the door behind her, she cried, "Oh, God, what is it?" Why couldn't she live in peace? Why does she want so much to forget the past? She did everything to never remember it. And then Liam. Now he knows where she goes to school. Cindy suddenly squeezed her eyes shut. What if he starts to scare her? What will he tell those she socializes with at the Institute? About where she used to be, who she used to be. What to do? Robert got in the car, looked at her, held out a tissue, then sighed and touched off. When Cindy had calmed down a little, he asked, "Well, who was it?" "It doesn't matter." "Well, it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter." They drove home in silence. Already in front of the door, Cindy turned to him. "Please don't say anything to Charles. I don't want him to be nervous." "All right, if you say so." She knew that Robert was leaving in a week and decided that she just had to keep communication to a minimum. Charles was feeling much better. She lay awake all night, then decided that she should transfer to a correspondence school so she wouldn't need to be in the neighborhood much. And in the morning she got the news that made her clap her hands and scream like a little girl. At breakfast, Charles looked at her and said, "Cindy, you'll have to live here alone, but Sebastian will be around." "Why?" She looked at him fearfully. "What's wrong? Where are you going? Are you worse? You don't feel well?" Charles laughed. "If you'll let me say just a few words to your endless questions, I'll answer you." Cindy gave an embarrassed yelp and fell silent. "You see, Cindy, my son insists that I go with him. There's a clinic there that's willing to operate on me. And they even say the chances are good. Here, Robert's gonna stay for a couple weeks while I get checked out, and then we'll fly out together. Just for a couple months. I hope I'll be back on my own." Cindy couldn't take it anymore. She threw her arms around both Charles and Robert. For some reason, however, Robert kept her in his arms a little longer than he should have, which confused her. In the evening before going to bed, Cindy looked at herself in the mirror, eyes burning, a smile on her lips. No, not again. She can't, she mustn't. But the girl already realized that she had fallen in love with Robert irrevocably. She went out onto the balcony as she was in her light pajamas. Cindy always did. The balcony connected several bedrooms on the second floor. Charles lived on the first floor, so no one was in her way. She leaned on the railing, then turned her back to it, and found herself nose to nose with Robert. God, she'd completely forgotten he was on the second floor, too. Robert looked at Cindy with an admiring gaze. She should have run away, but she couldn't. Her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. "Cindy." His voice was hoarse, as if he was short of breath. He moved closer, and the girl just closed her eyes, feeling his lips on hers. 2 weeks flew by like a day. Cindy thought that all these feelings and experiences that are shown in movies are all far-fetched, but no, she felt like 10 heroines put together. For the entire 2 weeks, she woke up in Robert's arms. She was insanely embarrassed in front of Charles, because he knew everything about her past. How would he feel about their liaison? Robert had made far-reaching plans. He talked about the fact that in 6 months his contract would be up, and he would be back. He'll come back. They'll get married right away. You'll see, it'll be great. And Daddy will dance with you at our wedding. Every time Cindy looked at Robert asleep, she promised herself that she would tell him tomorrow. but each time she put it off. She was sure that Robert would push her away in disgust, and she wanted it so badly, another day of happiness. She made it to the day of their departure, and when the bags were packed, she sat down next to Robert. "We need to talk." Robert turned to her. "Is something wrong?" Cindy didn't have time to answer. Robert's phone rang and he was speaking German, but even Cindy's knowledge of foreign languages was enough for her to realize that it was a woman calling and demanding to know when Robert would be back. Robert answered almost rudely, finally saying that he had asked her not to call. When he disconnected, Sebastian entered the room. "The carriage is here. We have to hurry. There's traffic in the city." Robert put his arm around Cindy. "I'll bring my father and we'll talk about everything, or on the phone. I promise. I'm sorry, I gotta go." He leaned into her ear. "Love you." As they drove away, Cindy felt like the most miserable person ever. She put the calendar on the table and then crossed out today. The countdown of waiting went on. 3 weeks later, she realized something was wrong with her. Only what? The hunch came suddenly. It couldn't be. She was walking out of the clinic this morning, walking and smiling like a complete idiot. The doctor said she was pregnant. The term is very small, so when she asked who was there, he laughed and said, "A baby." Nothing else is known yet. Robert's baby is in it, his and hers. It's so unexpected, so exciting. He'll be calling tonight. Cindy had no idea what his reaction would be. She was already approaching the gate when she felt someone looking at her. Cindy turned around and immediately met eyes with Liam. She felt the blood rushing in her head. He had found her and here she was. She could definitely forget about being happy now. Liam smiled crookedly and quickly disappeared behind the bushes. Cindy walked into the house. She sat down on a chair in her clothes. She sat for a long time, then stood up resolutely and took out her suitcase. Strangely enough, she had a lot of stuff. She had to take a bag too. She thought and took half of the money that had been left for the household. Now she had to write something to Charles. He was the only one she trusted enough to talk to about everything. The letter turned out to be longer than she thought it would be. She explained everything about her and Robert, nothing about the pregnancy. She left the house, found Sebastian. "Sebastian, I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" "Yes, I'm going home." The man put away the shovel he was fixing. "Cindy, what happened?" "It's a long story, and I'd like to forget it." "Charles, I left a letter." "And Robert?" Cindy blushed. "What about Robert?" "Cindy, do you take everyone for an idiot? You can never hide what's been going on between you two." "I'll call him." "I don't know what you're thinking, but you're wrong. Sebastian, don't you understand? I'm not worthy of Robert. He'll forget me, marry a normal girl. It's all wrong. He won't be happy with me anyway." Cindy hugged Sebastian, then headed for the gate. "Wait, can I at least give you a ride?" She waved. "No need, thanks. I'll do it myself." Her grandmother's house greeted her with a dank dampness. It had taken her 3 days to get here. She'd changed her route on purpose so no one could find her. Her passport had been registered where she had once lived with her parents, which was almost 150 miles away. Her grandmother took her when Cindy was very young. To be honest, she can barely remember everything, and what she does remember, she doesn't want to remember. No one in the village knew what had happened to her parents. No one would ever even try to ask her grandmother because she had a short answer for everyone. Those who didn't know would blink for a long time afterward, not understanding why they were being punished. Cindy walked around the house. "Well, Cindy, there you are, back where you hated it so much. It's all right. It's going to be all right, isn't it, my good girl?" Cindy stroked her belly. She was sure she was going to have a girl, a little sunshine, with Robert's eyes. Having melted the stove, Cindy made herself some tea and sat down at the table. Tomorrow she would devote the day to cleaning, and then she had to do something about work. It was a big village, so maybe she could find something. In the morning, Cindy cleaned up, threw away a lot of things, then saw a large dried-up rod under the door. She even smiled a little. Grandma, if Cindy did something wrong, they grabbed the rod right away. And it didn't matter at all how old she was, with what pleasure she broke it and threw it into the stove. A few days later, Cindy went to the so-called office. All village business used to be settled there. Time had passed, of course, but not so much. She wondered how long she had not been here. It was 5 years. On the one hand, it was a long time, but on the other hand, what was 5 years for a person? For an ordinary person, it was just a short period of time, but for Cindy, it was a lifetime. David, Cindy hardly remembered the name of the local boss, even waved his hands. What's the job? Those who have worked all their lives have nothing to pay, and you say work. Cindy was confused. What am I supposed to do? What do you do? The same thing everyone else does. Thank God they haven't canceled the buses yet. So everyone goes downtown to work. Cindy sighed. Well, I'll drive. She had to buy a new S-Ihnen card, the one she'd thrown away at the station. She found a job quickly. The salary was small, minus the road, not much at all, but it was better than nothing. Cindy hid the money she'd taken from Charles' house. Her daughter would have to buy everything. The girl checked in at the local clinic, had all the tests. Oh, honey, I don't know what to tell you. The full-figured woman doctor, who was Cindy's doctor, was going through the papers on the table. The girl tensed up. Something wrong with the baby? No, there's nothing wrong with the baby. It's you. No hemoglobin, bad blood, and a very narrow pelvis. Not only will you have to come in more often than other women, but you'll have to go to the hospital a week before delivery. Is that serious? Well, how can I put it? For some people, these problems are not problems at all, but for others, they're dangerous. I don't want to scare you for nothing. I'll say this, we'll watch you, and then we'll see. Does the child have a father? Cindy smiled. Well, what about without a daddy? Children without a daddy don't exist, but we don't have one, and we won't have one. I see. And another single mom. Well, go on, and we'll have another test in a week. Cindy was very worried at first, but then she calmed down. She feels great, so she's gonna be fine. She will give birth to Christina, she will love her, and they will have a real family. Cindy didn't know why. How could she be so sure it would be a daughter? She just knew, that's all. When it was time to give birth, it was March outside. There was still a lot of snow, but the sun was already cheerful. Cindy's back had been pulling since the morning. She doesn't go into the hospital until Monday, and today is still Saturday. Strange, maybe pregnant women have a reaction to the weather like old people. She decided to go out for a walk. Maybe she'd get some air and feel better. As soon as she stepped outside, a car stopped in front of the house. She froze. Her heart was pounding so hard, she wanted to clutch it with her hand. Robert slowly stepped out of the car. He looked at her with a grim look that didn't bode well. Well, hello there, fugitive. Robert, how did you find me? He wanted to answer something, but he finally saw her stomach. What is that? Robert, did you run away from me with my baby? Yes, Robert, I ran away from you with my baby. He walked towards her. His look did not bode well. The closer he got, the more his heart pounded, the more his lower back ached. He came, close, stopped. Now you're going to have to answer all my questions. Cindy nodded and slowly began to settle down. The pain in her back intensified and began to develop throughout her body. Cindy, Cindy. She heard Robert's voice as if from far away. The girl felt that she was being carried somewhere, taken somewhere, then scolded for something. Somewhere in the distance a child's cry, so thin it must be her girl. Cindy tried to open her eyes, but she fell somewhere completely. Mommy, wake up. Mommy? Whose name is that? Cindy opened her eyes. An unfamiliar white room. Cindy tried to stroke her stomach, but it wasn't there. The remnants of sleep instantly faded away. Where? And she saw there was a nurse standing next to the bed. She had a small bundle in her arms, with only a small nose sticking out of it. Here's your princess. She's so pretty, but she's hungry too. Let me help you. Cindy took her daughter and froze. How pretty she was. She really was a princess. She wanted to feed her, but she felt someone looking at her. Robert was standing in the doorway. Cindy remembered everything. What would happen now? Cindy. Robert, I'll explain everything to you. She knew perfectly well that this time she could not explain anything to him, and perhaps she did not need to, since Charles had not told him anything. Perhaps she did not need to. Let it be her secret. Cindy looked at Robert with the eyes of a beaten dog. Tears sprang from her eyes. He rushed to her. Don't cry, you can't cry. Everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right now. Robert picked her up from the hospital. He made a mess with all the flowers and balloons. They'd never seen anything like it in the village. When they got home, Cindy saw not only the crib she'd bought from an ad, but lots of beautiful things for her daughter. In the evening, Robert took her hands in his. Cindy, when will Christina be ready for the road? Cindy was frightened. If she had a chance here, it would become quite small in the city. Oh, Robert, she's just a baby. Maybe in a few months. Months? But that's so long I have to work. A week later, Robert left and said he'd be back in 2 or 3 weeks. He couldn't come any sooner. I've got to tell my dad. You know, he's walking now, but with a cane. He is. I'm so happy for him. You have no idea. He's gonna be so happy. I didn't tell them anything. He left and Cindy felt so sad. When Christina was a month old, they went to the clinic. It was possible, of course, to wait for the doctor at home, but she was so fed up with the unloved village that she could not tell. After the checkup, when Cindy decided to walk through the market, she suddenly stopped like a stumbling block. Cindy thought she saw Liam in the crowd. She took off her seat and with a quick step went to where the familiar face had flashed, but found no one else like him. The young woman exhaled. No, it couldn't be. Where would Liam come from? If only for her soul, but the address. And then Cindy remembered that she had once mentioned her town in conversation. If it was him, what did he want? Cindy walked through the market one more time. Christina was starting to get cranky, and the woman headed for the cab stand. Robert had left her enough money to get around comfortably. Before getting into the car, she looked around once more. No, she was definitely imagining things. Why had I come all the way out here? At home she fed and tucked Christina in and went out into the yard. It had been over 2 weeks since Robert had left. They'd called yesterday, and he'd said he'd be here today or tomorrow. Cindy couldn't make sense of herself. Was she happy? Yes, very. But what lay ahead? That she didn't know. Living and lying to Robert? He had said last time that as soon as Christina could be moved, they would get married right away. She would finally be his wife. Cindy decided to weed with the flowers, the only decoration in the yard. The door to the house was open, so if Christina woke up, she would hear right away. "Hello, Cindy." She flinched and turned around. Liam was standing in the yard. "What are you doing here? What do you want? How did you find me?" Liam smirked. "But it's not that hard. Let's go inside, darling. I missed you madly." Cindy stood up opposite him. "We're not going to any house. Leave me alone at last. Your debt is paid. What do you want from me anyway?" Liam grabbed her arm and dragged her into the house. Cindy tried to break free, but remained silent, afraid of scaring her daughter. Liam threw her on the couch, sat down himself across from her. "I have debts to pay, but I have debts to pay, and you can help me pay them off. You're crazy. I'll go to the police, though. Then I guess your Robert will find out about everything. You know Michael has lots of pictures of you and testimonials from satisfied customers, too. Liam, leave me alone. What makes you think I have to pay your debts at all?" Liam laughed, stood up and headed towards the crib. Cindy quickly tore off the couch and stood between him and the crib. "I don't have any money. I'm telling you the truth." "You don't, but yours, Robert, very much does. It's not mine." "Cindy," Liam sighed. "You see, you're my last hope. I won't give up. I have nothing to lose, and if I don't have the money in a week, I'll tell your Robert everything. Don't wait a week. I'm listening to you." They turned around and Robert was standing on the doorstep. He motioned to Liam. He tried to jump out the door, but he didn't have time. Robert caught him and punched him in the face. "What are you doing here? And why does Cindy have to give you the money?" Liam tried to get away again, but immediately received another blow. "Your Cindy is a call girl. She's been a call girl for a long time." "Oh, you bastard." Robert punched Liam again, and Cindy quietly settled down on the couch. That was it. The phantom happiness was over before it had even begun. Tears streamed from her eyes. 10 minutes later, a car roared to life. Apparently Liam had left. Robert came back, sat down on a chair, and approached her. "Is it true?" "Robert, I've been meaning to tell you everything, but I kept being afraid you wouldn't want to." "You're right, I won't." "You're crap. You're such an asshole. Am I gonna take my daughter away from you? Or maybe my daughter isn't mine either? And you just don't know who her daddy is." Cindy stood up, proudly raising her head. "You'd better think she's not yours. It'll be easier on everyone." Robert stood up, gave her a long look, and walked out of the house, and Cindy collapsed on the couch and sobbed. It was 200 hours later when she went outside. There were big bags on the porch, diapers, clothes, cereal. She cried again. God, why is she like this? A few months passed. In the evening, Cindy was counting the money she had. The money that Robert had once given her had recently run out. She had been very frugal. She had bought nothing for herself, only the cheapest food. Now she would have to make do with her allowance, which she had been saving. The woman put the money aside. A month ago she had to buy a car of firewood. It hit her budget very hard, but she has a child in the house and no option to heat economically. For 3 months she will definitely have enough. But then what? She didn't know yet. There was a knock at the door. Cindy flinched. It was evening outside, raining. Who could it have brought to her? Cindy looked out the window. She couldn't see anything. Everything was flooded. The windows were fogged up. She felt creepy for some reason. She went to the door. Who's there? Cindy, open up. It's Charles. The woman quickly unhooked the door and threw herself on the neck of her past savior. Where did you come from? How? I'm here to meet my granddaughter. I barely got the address from Robert. What happened? Cindy sighed. What was bound to happen someday? Robert found out about everything. Well, what did he find out? Did you tell him what happened? No, I didn't have time. He's gone. Who cares what happened? It happened. So you're okay with it? Of course. I won't even try. I'll raise my daughter. She'll grow up a little. We'll move to the city. I'll put her in a kindergarten, and I'll get a job myself. The man looked at her carefully, then shook his head. Show me your granddaughter. Charles insisted that she go to the city with him. If you don't want to live in our house, I'll buy you an apartment. Why are you sitting here alone? A child should grow up in civilization. But Robert's not here. He's gone to his home country. Angry as hell. He doesn't talk to anyone and hardly calls me. But why do I bring everyone nothing but misery? Come on, don't beat yourself up. It's just the way life is, and there's nothing we can do about it. 3 days later they left. Charles, as promised, bought her a 2-room apartment nearby, and he visited her often. Christina loved her grandfather. Cindy was finally able to finish her studies and even get a job. The daughter was 4 years old when Charles caught a cold. At first it was just a cold, to which he paid no attention, and as it turned out, for nothing. The illness progressed, and within a week he was sick. Cindy and Christina moved in with him. Cindy had to take a vacation because he didn't want anyone else in the house. Charles, we have to eat. Cindy, but I don't want to really. Tell me, did Robert show up? No, of course not. What do you think? Cindy looked at him in surprise. What do I think? I don't understand you. Cindy, I'll be gone, and you'll be alone in the world again. Hasn't there been a good man by your side all this time? Cindy smiled. No, I haven't. I don't understand. Have you decided to marry me off? I have, and as soon as possible. I don't think I'm going to make it this time. What are you talking about? Don't you dare even think of such a thing. By evening, Charles was worse, and the doctor insisted on hospitalization. Cindy went with him, and with Christina remained faithful Sebastian, with whom the girl was also very friendly. Cindy sat in the corridor while the doctor examined Charles, then he came out to her. Why didn't you come sooner? The doctor was about 40, a very handsome man with a calm look. You don't know how hard it was to get Charles to go to the hospital. He wouldn't go now. He was just so sick he couldn't argue. My name is Jacob. Seeing the mute question in Cindy's eyes, he smiled. Just Jacob for you. Unfortunately, people like that are not uncommon. They're afraid to cause a lot of trouble, but they cause even more. Excuse me, can I buy you a coffee and we can talk? Yes, of course, I'd appreciate it. They were in the doctor's office. He made coffee, put the cup in front of Cindy. What can I say? Of course it's very bad, considering that Charles has had many operations in his life, and his body is very worn out. It's nothing critical. I mean, we'll fight. We'll get it out, but there may be complications, but it's too early to tell. Thank you. I'm very worried. This man is very important to us. To us? Are you married? The doctor seemed upset, but Cindy smiled. No, we are me and my daughter. You have a daughter? Yes, Christina. She's about to be 5. She's probably as beautiful as you are, isn't she? Cindy was embarrassed. Not at all, much better than me. Jacob laughed. You're a real mother. Only with real mothers, their child is unequivocally better. They talked for another half hour. Cindy was so at ease, and Jacob suddenly said, Cindy, I don't even know how to say this properly. In general, I would like to invite you, for example, to a restaurant or maybe somewhere where your girl would be interested too." She smiled. A nice man, of course, older than she was, but that was such a small thing. Maybe Charles is right. Stop waiting for Robert, who doesn't care about them. I'll think about it, only if later, when Charles is feeling better. No problem, I'll wait. Besides, I have an incentive now to get him back on his feet as soon as possible. They said goodbye warmly. "Tell me, what time can I come tomorrow?" "Right after lunch, with a lot of tests and procedures before lunch." "Okay, thank you very much." She left and Jacob stood pensive for a long time. The family must be very wealthy. I wonder who she is to this Charles. A daughter? Doesn't seem like it, but they must have something in common, so it makes sense. The thing is, Jacob always wanted the good life. He was a good doctor, though, and he loved his job. He didn't want to lead anyone astray. He just thought that if he was to connect his life with someone, it should be with someone who would be of some use besides love. Cindy seemed to be just the person he needed. He would have to get her interested, but in the meantime he would treat the man she had come with. After a few days, Charles got better, so much so that he asked Cindy to bring him some cutlets. Cindy looked at him in surprise. "Cutlets? That's right. I don't know why I wanted cutlets so badly." Jacob, who was also in the room, laughed. "Well, now I see it's on the mend. So, Cindy, you must keep your promise." He left the room and Charles looked at Cindy. "What promise, if it's no secret?" Cindy waved it away. "Jacob asked me to go to a restaurant, and I said I'd think about it when you were better." Charles hesitated. Why, that wouldn't be such a bad idea. There was something about the doctor he didn't like, and he couldn't say what it was, but he was a grown man, an established man, not a bad match for Cindy. But there was an unpleasant feeling in his soul. And Cindy and Jacob were really developing a romance. Cindy couldn't say she liked the doctor very much as a man, but he wasn't disgusting either. He was smart, very versatile, and he was good with Christina. Charles had already checked out when Cindy came to see him. She and Jacob had been dating for a month and a half, and today he proposed to her. Cindy was confused. She didn't think it would be that quick. Charles immediately saw that Cindy was worried about something. "Cindy, what's wrong and why are you alone?" "I came to talk. Jacob proposed to me." Charles felt a twinge in his heart. "I said I'd think about it. A month and a half is not a long time." "Cindy, how do you feel about him?" "How do you feel about him?" "I don't know. He doesn't disgust me, he's interesting." Cindy grinned. "Of course it's nothing like it is with Robert." Charles looked at her carefully. "Are you still in love with Robert?" She looked at him in surprise. Why is it possible to fall out of love with someone? There was silence for a few minutes. Then Charles said, "Yes, Cindy, you have to weigh everything. Loving one person and living with another is very hard." She left and Charles picked up the phone. He didn't want to interfere in the relationship between Robert and Cindy, especially since the latter didn't want to hear anything about her. But now he decided that he would try. Robert hung up the phone. He had immediately interrupted his father when he talked about Cindy, but the fact that she had been proposed to and would probably accept it left a residue on his soul. He took the picture from the table, and no one here knew anything about her. So the little portrait of Cindy always stood on his desk, and also Christina's. His father, though Robert had never asked for it, sent pictures of her from time to time. Robert knew Dad had bought her an apartment, knew he was helping his granddaughter, so he sent him money. He didn't say it was for Christina, but Charles understood it all himself. The older Christina got, the more she looked like Robert. He saw it perfectly well. He looked at her pictures for a long time, but he couldn't help it. There was a very strong resentment against his father. Why hadn't he told him right away? Shit. He got up from the table and walked over to the window. He stared out at the street for a while, then pulled out his cell phone. Dad, can you tell me how and what? Why did Cindy do it? Of course I'll tell you everything. I should have done it a long time ago, but you didn't want to hear it. They talked for over an hour. When Robert hung up the phone, he felt worse. Shit, so what? Did it get better? No, definitely not, because he now realized that he behaved, to put it mildly, in a bad way. Cindy, it was her fault too. She should have told him everything at once too. Would he have been with her then? Probably not. But then there wouldn't have been all this. There wouldn't have been Christina. There wouldn't have been those very happy days. All in all, Robert was completely confused, so he knew he had to go home, look Cindy in the eye, and then decide what to do. Some nasty inner voice squeaked. Who needs you after all these years? Cindy's doing the right thing. She would get married and live a normal life, not wait for the weather. Robert tried to muffle that voice, opened the door, asked the secretary to come in. Emma, I have to go to America. Any questions are for the deputy. I'm to be called as a last resort. Okay, I'm sorry. Is there a problem with your father? No, he's fine. Thank you. He noticed a shadow on the secretary's face, and suddenly he remembered that this nice woman had been very concerned about his father's health when he was here for surgery, had even visited him in the hospital a few times, and then they had left. Robert vividly remembered how glum his father had been the day he'd left, but Robert had attributed his mood to the fact that Sebastian had reported Cindy's disappearance. What if that wasn't the case at all? Could it be that father and Emma? Damn, but why can't he ever see beyond his own nose? Cindy and Jacob sat in the cafe. She has to give an answer tonight. Cindy has been up all night, she kept thinking. Jacob is good, reliable. What more could a woman want? Everything seems fine, but Jacob, I realize you're waiting for an answer. Cindy, why don't we have dinner first? She smiled. Christina was at Charles, and it was safe to rest. Cindy knew that Charles would tuck the girl in, read her a story, and they would probably watch cartoons on TV while her mom was away. Cindy forbade watching cartoons before bedtime, but the grandfather spoiled his granddaughter. They ate dinner, and Cindy realized the hour had come. Jacob, I'm going to be honest with you. I've given your proposal a lot of thought, and I can tell you now, I couldn't marry you. I have been in love with another man for many years, and I would hate to lie to you. Jacob sighed. You know, I expected that answer. It was clear to me that when we're together, you're not really with me. So you're not resentful. Cindy was glad. She didn't want to offend Jacob. I'm offended, but not offended enough not to suggest that you stay friends. While the flight lasted, Robert thought about his life. At the time when he met Cindy, he had a girlfriend, and admittedly, he was even going to get married, but not until he met Cindy. It was only then that he realized what true love meant. The parting was hard. The girl was the daughter of his boss. What does he have in the end? Nothing. After he left Cindy, he couldn't think of any other relationship. He'd had women, of course, but they were just for one day. He took a cab and went home. He wondered if Cindy was at her father's, how would their meeting happen? There was no Cindy, but there was his father who said glumly, "You must be late. They're at the restaurant, and Cindy will give him an answer tonight." How? Right. What did you want? He's a decent man, not the wind in the field like some people. Daddy? Daddy what? Cindy should have gotten married a long time ago, and she's been waiting for you, you fool. What restaurant are they at? The Wave, I think. Where are you going? I'm going that way. I won't let her say yes. Cindy and Jacob went outside. Do you need a ride? No, I don't need a ride. I'll walk. Cindy, it's late, but the weather's nice. Cindy. A shout literally tore through the evening air. They turned and saw Robert running towards them. Cindy felt her legs go cotton. Jacob looked at her pale face in surprise. Is that him? Yes. Robert ran up angrily, looked at Jacob, then shifted his gaze to Cindy. Cindy, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm an idiot. I'll be sure to beg your forgiveness. But now you must tell this man that you will not marry him, because otherwise I will not vouch for myself. Jacob's eyebrows flew upward, but he found the strength to laugh. Calm down, young man. Cindy has already turned me down, apparently because of you. 2 months later, Robert finally moved back home. He was going to start his own business, but now he had other things to worry about. Dad, are you okay? Charles laughed. I'm fine. You look like an opera singer. Dad, it's not funny. I don't know why Cindy likes tuxedos so much. Why don't you change? Charles waved me off. I've got time. It's 2 hours till the signing. I'd hurry up if I were you. We're going to have a guest any minute. A man has kindly agreed to fly to our wedding, or rather, a guest. What's it got to do with me? They're your guests. Not exactly. My assistant Emma's coming to my wedding. Remember her? Was it his imagination, or did his father turn pale? The doorbell rang and Charles almost ran into the room. Appeared in front of Robert and Emma 20 minutes later in full parade. The wedding ceremony was being held in the best restaurant in town. When Robert saw Cindy walking toward him and leading the little princess by the hand, his breath caught. How good his girls are! They are the most beautiful. How happy is he that Cindy has found the strength to forgive him. And Christina is the most wonderful child in the world. They walked over. Robert kissed his bride tenderly, and Christina was picked up in his arms. Cindy looked around as if searching for someone. Robert, where's Charles? If he's not here, there's no ceremony. You know what he means to us. He knew. Gently he turned Cindy around and pointed somewhere. There in a corner sat Charles and Emma. They were chatting, and Emma's hands were resting in Charles. It seemed like they were alone here, and there wasn't a crowd of dressed-up guests. Cindy smiled. Isn't that Emma by any chance? Emma, how do you know? He called out for her when he was delirious with fever, but he wouldn't tell me who it was. Charles and Emma even had to be called so the ceremony could begin. It's been a year. Cindy, you coming soon? Yes, Robert. The trial's over. I'll be there soon. How did it go? It was great. Michael and Liam got a good settlement. I'll tell you all about it when I get there. By the way, I have more news for you. Robert smiled. Cindy spent a year trying to find the girls who had worked for Michael out of choice. There were a lot of girls. Liam often figured in their path too. By all means, she decided to punish them. Robert helped in any way he could. Today was the last trial. He lit the candles on the table, looked around the room. By the glass in the hall stood a small box, and in it, of marvelous beauty, a bracelet. Cindy was preparing a surprise for him. Only he already knew what that surprise was and had thoroughly prepared for it. This morning, he happened to see the test in the bathroom, and it had a clear 2 stripes on it. The door slammed open and Cindy appeared on the kitchen doorstep. She gave the table a surprised look, then looked at Robert. Are we having some kind of celebration? She looked at her husband suspiciously, trying to remember what she might have forgotten. "Of course, I hope you'll give me a son this time." Cindy sighed frustratedly. "You know everything, don't you?" He picked her up in his arms, "And I know everything, everything, everything. And I also know that I love you very much, more than life." The woman laughed, hugged her husband. "You don't know everything." Robert looked at her anxiously. "Tell me? We're going to have twins." He gently set Cindy on the floor and exhaled completely dumbfounded. "Really? That's it." Cindy laughed and hugged her husband gently.
Subscribe and click the bell.
It was a sunny April. Spring is always associated with the beginning of new life. All people were looking forward to it this year because March was cold and the awakening of nature was delayed. But the news of this month amazed everyone. Everywhere in the newspapers, on TV and radio, they were talking about only one thing. Everyone from old grandmothers at the doorstep to pigeons flying over Washington was talking about this news. The Capitol was stunned by this event. And everything revolved around a famous businessman who decided to get married. But it would not have struck anyone if not for one strange circumstance. He had many marriages with stars, but this time it was different. The girl was a complete stranger to no one. No one knew her name or even her appearance. All the newspapers had a question mark drawn instead of her face. The media kept him on his toes. They kept watch over him day and night in the hope that when he came out, he would at least clear the air. Martin Newman was one of the most famous businessmen in the world. His company developed games, made a sensation years ago, and was still the main one on the market. He was loved by everyone from 15-year-old teenagers to men in their 40s. Of course, there were also girls among the audience, but still the majority of the audience were men who liked to play war games at the computer. Martin was known for his personal life to almost everyone. He'd been married to 3 celebrities from abroad, but now he'd surprised everyone. To marry someone unknown to any living soul seemed strange and irrational. No one knew who this mysterious girl was, who was so zealously hidden in his mansion. But where there is intrigue and mystery, there's interest. Society needs these mysteries. That's why this wedding was eagerly awaited by everyone. One journalist managed to get as close as possible to his house, bypassing the 3 guards at the gate. The house was, of course, outside the city. The businessman tried to solve almost all cases remotely, but it was a very dodgy reporter who, unfortunately, also failed. When Martin was leaving his house to get into his car, the reporter jumped out of the bushes and ran at him with all his legs. But he was immediately stopped by the guards. One of the thugs wanted to threaten the poor guy with a gun. He started to pull it out of his pocket, but Martin stopped him. "Let him through." "I will quickly answer," in a stern tone, the businessman told his guard. He obeyed and stepped back. The journalist immediately realized what he was doing and quickly pulled out a camera and a microphone. "Can you tell me the name of your fiancée? Just the name, please." Martin hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to understand whether to answer or not. But he decided to answer. "Her name is Agatha," he said, barely grinned enigmatically, and got into a car with tinted windows. The very next day, it was all over the news channels and newspapers. The world knew the name. And again, the discussion of the wedding, which was scheduled for May 15, began. Everyone was waiting for this event. Wanted to at least somehow get information about where the wedding of a famous businessman will be held. What guests are invited? Where will they go on their honeymoon? But Martin and his agents were silent. All questions of journalists remained unanswered. Only sometimes on the face of the businessman could be seen a slight smirk when he was asked about the bride. This only fueled the interest of the public. At the presentation of the new project, Martin, unfortunately, flooded with questions not about the purpose of his activities, but about marriage. He was beginning to tire of it. In the midst of the siege, which was arranged by journalists, the businessman made a sign to everyone with his hand to wait a minute and leaned over to his manager. Quietly asked him something. How could the reporters not strain their ears? They couldn't hear anything. The question was, what if she wakes up? Martin asked the manager he trusted like his mother. Those are strong drugs. Nothing will happen, he replied and winked at the chief. Finally, the cherished day arrived. The wedding was decided to be held in the very center. People crowded around the fence instead, trying to get a glimpse of the bride and groom. And then, accompanied by 3 escort cars, a Maybach with tinted windows drove up to Max. People were almost throwing themselves at the car, trying to see who was sitting there. But they failed miserably. They were dragged away by law enforcement. There was a commotion and a crush. After a few minutes, a Polak Martin got out of the car. He did not even look back and immediately went to the door of the registry office. But he was stopped by a photographer who pointed to the bride. He wanted to take a picture of them at the registry office. Happy and full of hope for a bright future. "You will only take pictures of what I say," rudely replied Martin. He pushed the guy away and entered the building, and the audience watched the bride's exit. But even here, they had no luck. The driver opened the door and helped the girl in the white dress stand up. As soon as the light fell on her face, everyone screamed with delight. Immediately, the discussion began. "Oh my God, she's so young. She must be marrying him for his money." They were talking in the crowd. "It's obvious she's a kept woman." Others responded. Amid all the shouting and yelling, the bride walked towards the building. She was accompanied by a guard with black glasses. She held onto his arm as if she feared she would fall. They walked very slowly. Someone in the crowd immediately said that she was handicapped, and everyone picked up on that. There were 1,000 cameras pointed at the poor girl. Everyone wanted to capture her face and her gait. The media was at the forefront of capturing every little detail to create new gossip. The public had to be fed new content, bread and spectacle. The motto of ancient Rome is always relevant, and the tabloids are doing a great job of it. Finally, the bride entered the registry office and the shouts of the crowd were left behind. Before her opened a stunning view of the high ceilings, framed, gilded stucco. At the top, a painting depicting angels could be seen. Everything suggests it's a place of peace. But the bride didn't feel that way. She felt rather strange in general. This was noticed by the guests as well. They also managed to notice her incredible beauty. The girl was very slender and young. In appearance, she was not more than 25. Among the guests on the groom's side were his colleagues or some influential people in business. On the bride's side, there were only 2 bridesmaids who were sitting on chairs and chatting. Everyone was waiting for the ceremony to begin. This bride was acting very strangely, not talking to anyone. She's standing in the corner looking down at the floor. "After all, it's her wedding," said one of the guests of the celebration. It was a woman named Lily, who also had a similar company. Only they developed games not for computers, but for mobile devices. And they have the right audience. Mostly people over 50 and don't talk. Rumor has it that this is the model he brought back from Australia. She doesn't know the language. Maybe that's why she doesn't talk to anyone and acts so quiet, her neighbor replied. "Really?" Another woman joined the conversation. "I'm sure it's his niece, maybe even his cousin. He's had feelings for her for a long time. But with his parents alive, of course, he couldn't marry her. It would be a disgrace. And now that his parents are dead, he can finally do it. How awful." Lily marveled. "And where did you get this information?" "I have my own connections," answered about the woman Morris. She just explained to them the origin of this girl, and they do not believe her. What kind of outrage is this? What if the groom himself approached them? "Oh, dear Martin, it's so good to see you at last," Lily exclaimed, shaking his hand. "Good afternoon. It's very nice to see you all here as my guests. I hope everything is satisfactory. Of course, we were just discussing you. We're so happy for you. But Martin, tell me, why the secrecy?" One of the women laughed. "Will you never reveal your girlfriend's identity to us?" "I'm madly in love with her," the businessman exclaimed sharply. It was as if he had rehearsed this phrase for a long time. That's why it sounded a bit fake. So as soon as I met her, I decided to make her my wife. "I hope the bride doesn't mind," the other woman joked. Martin looked at her strangely and without replying, walked away with his head held high. as if the phrase he had just said offended him very much. They were a strange couple, Lily summed up. Rumors were going from extreme to extreme. But the fact was the fact. The girl was unknown to anyone. She had come from nowhere. No one had ever seen her around Martin. No one knew how long they had been dating. Absolutely nothing was known. That's why the news of the wedding made the whole community so excited. It was a real sensation. It was Agatha who was too mysterious. She hadn't uttered a word since she got out of the car. No one knew what her voice was like. Was it melodious or rough? And how old was she? She looked very young. And she was marrying a man who turned 55 this year. All of this didn't connect in my head. While everyone was whispering and talking, waiting for the ceremony to begin, Agatha was led out of the hall to the right into the corridor. There they dragged her into a room, sat her in front of a mirror, and began to put her makeup in order. She was working right in the car. So correct me, that's all. In 15 minutes, the ceremony will begin, said Agent Martin, and left the room, leaving the girls alone. Agatha was not feeling well. She saw everything through a veil, as if she were in a dream. She stared at the mirror for a long time, trying to remember something. It was as if those facial features were alien to her. Her own face was not like her real one. She was like she was in a trance. The makeup artist did her amazing makeup and then put on a veil to cover her face. Like, baby, you're ready, smiled the makeup artist. I hope you really love him. Badoma. And Agatha was pushed towards the door. She completely lost her bearings and didn't know where to go. But she knew the guard was guarding her at the door. He led the girl back to the hall where the ceremony was to be held. Agatha was literally pushed onto the white carpet, studded with rose petals. She almost collapsed on the floor. What amazed the guests. But the girl immediately recovered and, under the melodious music, went down the aisle with flowers. All eyes at this moment were directed at her. Many were judging. Many pretended to be happy, though no one, by and large, cared. They'd been invited here as a courtesy. Well, and to fill the hall is not good that a famous businessman is left without guests at the wedding. Agatha had time to look around the hall. There were people in black on every corner. They all folded their arms and stood like real guards waiting for an attack. Finally, the girl came to the altar. Martin was already waiting for her there. He stood with a very serious look and from time to time slightly bent his knees from excitement. Agatha stood opposite him. At that moment she felt dizzy, but she did not show it. Hello, honored guests. Hello, dear newlyweds. The woman greeted the guests, registering the marriage. Especially the husband is very young, joked one of the guests, but he was immediately silenced. The others ignored the ridiculous joke. Today is the legal marriage of couples whose love has struck a chord with many. The registrar continued. Dear Agatha and Martin. She addressed the couple standing next to her. Today is the most beautiful and unforgettable event in your life. Today you are creating a young family. Creating a family is the beginning of a good union of two loving hearts. From this day you will go through life hand in hand, together experiencing the joys of happy days and sorrows. Observing the solemn rites before the state registration of marriage. Please answer, is your desire to be married? Is it free, mutual, and sincere? Are you ready not only to create a friendly and strong family, but also to preserve it and give a decent upbringing to your future children? I ask you to answer. Groom. The man, not thinking long, took Agatha's hands and looking into her eyes said yes. I ask you to answer bride. The girl turned to Agatha. The bride was embarrassed. All this seemed to her like a strange dream. In her memory flashed some fragments of the past, which confused her very much. She saw neither her chosen one nor her fiancé in the world, but under his intense, heavy gaze. She nevertheless answered in a zombified voice. Yes, the registrar smiled happily and then proceeded to perform her duties by your mutual consent in the presence of your witnesses and guests. Please exchange rings and sign your signatures. Martin gently took Agatha's hand and placed the gold ring on her ring finger. The bride did the same. The registrarша stepped back and pointed them to the papers. Lying on a beautiful marble table, a black pen lay next to them. Now sign your signatures, joyfully exclaimed the woman. The couple bent over the deed book. But suddenly from behind, there was the sound of a door opening, and then someone's swift running. Everyone turned around, including the newlyweds, and they saw a little girl who ran across the hall so fast that the guard could not catch up with her. The child ran to the reception desk and hugged Agatha tightly. She did not understand anything. Meanwhile, the girl hugged her tightly as if she had found her long-lost mother. "Security," Martin shouted. "Do your job." Huge men in black suits ran up to the girl and began to chain her away from the bride. The girl resisted. She was small, about 6 years old at most, but impossibly strong and a mom. "That's my mom." The girl screamed as hard as she could, struggling against these men in black glasses. One she kicked with her foot in the groin, and he immediately fell to his knees in pain. The other was pulling her legs. So the girl just jerked her foot, and the man fell with her shoe. "Mommy, wake up, it's me." "Your daughter," Mommy broadcast the girl, asking for the girl in the dress. "Please, Mommy Olekshka, remember me." She was trying to remember something, but she couldn't do anything. She didn't recognize that girl, no matter how much she wanted to. There was no way she could remember. Then the child pulled her white dress up so the bride leaned over and hugged her tightly around the neck and kissed her cheek. That kiss, like a fairy tale, dispelled all the fog. The woman's memory began to clear. Agatha was now completely sure that this was her daughter. To think it was her Rose, her baby girl. Where had she come from? Who are all these people? She looked at her pseudo-fiancé. He was standing there furious. He was burning with anger. His fingers were clenched into a fist. It was like he was about to punch someone. As soon as all the memories came flooding back, tears flowed from Agatha's eyes. She squatted down and hugged her daughter tightly. "Little Rose is my darling." It was a very tender moment, which unfortunately was interrupted by the bass of Martin's guard removing the baby. The guards had already recovered from the baby girl's marriage and started pulling her away again. This time they managed to snatch the baby out of the mother's hands. The girl yelled, "What is the urge?" tried to break free, but everything was to no avail. Who is she against, these huge thugs? "Let go of my child." Screaming at Agatha. "Somebody please call the police." All the guests were just shocked at what was happening. Like the marriage registrar herself in her experience, this was the first marriage that had gone completely wrong. "Rose." Agatha screamed, but no one was doing anything about it. Then she jumped up to her fiancé and started shaking him as hard as she could, clutching at his shoulder. "Will you order them to let them go, Rose Ashole?" The girl hissed angrily. "You shouldn't call me that." "Oh, you shouldn't." With a sly smirk, Martin. He pushed his wife away, and she fell right on top of the guard, who immediately grabbed her. No matter how much she kicked, it was completely pointless. Martin's bodyguard held her firmly in his arms. What kind of lawlessness was this? Did the guests start to get indignant and get up from their seats? "No one is leaving here." Martin shouted across the room. The wedding continues. The guests ignored him. No one was enjoying the show anymore. It smelled fried, but a sudden gunshot made them stop and sit back in their seats. Yes, Martin had to resort to this method of crowd control as well. I repeat, the wedding is in progress. He glared at Shu's terrified registrar and made her put the papers back. Then he beckoned to himself, who forcefully held Agatha down. She was terrified of what was happening. She was sobbing with fear and hatred. Martin signed the document and handed the pen to the bride. She looked at the man with such hatred that he even smirked, thinking that he had won. But he was very wrong. Agatha was not the timid type, not one to give up so easily. She picked up a pen, but instead of using it to make a scrawl on the paper, sharply stuck the thin rod into the stomach of the guard who was holding her. The pen was expensive steel, and so thin, it actually went into that piece of muscle like a sword. The man shrieked in pain and folded himself in half. Agatha ripped off her veil, slashed the man who was holding her poor child across the face with her fist, grabbed Rose by the arm and ran away on her way, managing to tear off the hem of her fairy dress. Running was now comfortable. Whirlwind, she ran out of the building, and 1,000 cameras were immediately pointed at her and her daughter. Reporters, like animals, pounced on the girl with questions. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. "Agatha, what happened? How do you comment on it?" someone asked. The girl was darting from side to side, trying to figure out where the exit from the registry office was. Martin's men were already running out and trying to catch her. She was screaming, asking people for help, but everyone just filmed her on their mobile cameras and iPads, trying to take as many photos and videos of the scandal as possible. She felt like a circus animal that was now performing in the arena. The girl couldn't believe what was happening. She just couldn't get her head around it. Why do people behave like this? And this very head was hurting more and more every minute. But the girl did not give up and wanted to climb over the temporary fence. But then the guard Martin grabbed her by the waist. He easily lifted her as if she weighed as much as a bruise, and carried her and the baby to the car. Agatha squealed, slapping him on the back. Rose was biting and turning and generally helping as best she could. But the man didn't care. He was walking firmly and confidently. The back door of the car had already been opened in front of him. As the guard approached the car, he threw the girl and child off him and pushed her into the passenger compartment. But Agatha, though seemingly weak, actually had good physical fitness. She did not fall on the seat and held on. Then the already angry guard began to literally shove her into the cabin. She resisted with all her might. Suddenly, everyone heard sirens wailing. It was getting closer and closer. And then someone said on the loudspeaker, "No place. Everybody stay in your seats." Aha, saw a cop pushing a security guard away from Martin. Looks like somebody called the cops after all. The guard was outraged by this behavior, but obeyed and stepped back to them. A furious Martin came running up. He was just furious and looked at everyone with such a look, as if he wanted to spear everyone with his eyes. What's going on here? How dare you invade another part of the territory? He was indignant, addressing the policeman. "We're here on a call, and I can see that we did not come in vain." The sergeant replied confidently, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Martin kept yelling. Then the policeman was silent for a moment. It was like he realized his mistake. "I'm sorry, but I just needed to already less confidently," said the policeman. "What to ruin my wedding? Please understand, I'm just doing my duty." While the two were trying to work things out, Agatha kicked out between the guard and them and went unnoticed. Thanks to the police car, there was a hole in the partition. It was through it that the girl wanted to get through. She took her daughter and rushed to the fence. She almost reached the gap through which it was possible to get through, but she was stopped by someone's strong male hand, which laid on her shoulder. She turned around and saw a rather young policeman, a regular sergeant in his uniform. "Where are you going, citizen?" he asked her sternly. Though from his lips it was not scary, but rather funny. He was a very nice man who tried to portray himself as a serious and brave fighter. He was very young. He had probably just been hired for the job. Agatha stopped. You looked at him with pitying eyes and whispered, "Please let go. I can't let you do that." The sergeant answered confidently. "But don't you feel sorry for a poor mother with a small child in her arms? Do you really want to give us to the sharks?" "What sharks?" "The girl?" The policeman replied haughtily. "Please." She folded her hands in peace. "He will ruin me and my daughter too." Then the sergeant couldn't stand it any longer. At last, the mask of a serious and self-confident man came off. Now only sympathy could be seen on his face. Agatha did not interfere and took advantage of this moment and put her daughter next to her. She approached the boy and whispered softly in his ear, "I'm going to pretend to use violence against a police officer." The sergeant even pulled away from her. He was embarrassed by the tone with which she said it. He looked at her. Agatha looked like a puppy, praying for help. The policeman stood in silence for a few seconds, then nodded, and while Martin and the other sergeant sorted out their rights, Agatha pretended to resist, threw herself into the policeman's arms, and began to thrash as hard as she could. He played along, trying to hold on. Everyone turned around at their altercation, and noticing this, the girl knocked the poor sergeant in the stomach with a sharp heel. He collapsed to the floor, though it was clear from his face that he was in no pain at all. He was only feigning pain. Agatha was very happy about this, as she didn't want to hurt anyone. At this time, a backup in the form of the surgeon's colleague was already running towards them. He ran up to his partner and helped him up. A few seconds later, Agatha was tied up by 2 other policemen, and her daughter Rose was taken by the hand and led away. The situation was heating up. Martin finally approached them. "Let my fiancée go," he ordered in a tone that left no room for disobedience. It should be noted that although he was a powerful man, but he was not lucky with his height. He was only 165 centimeters tall, and the commands from his mouth sometimes sounded very funny, especially when he was addressing a tall or clean-cut guy like this policeman. If any of his subordinates let his short stature be mentioned in any way, he would be immediately fired or stripped of his bonus. Martin hated that flaw in himself. Fortunately, for him, money did the job, and everyone, by and large, cared only about the size of his wallet. And now the answer of one of the policemen made him terribly angry. No, it wasn't said in words. It was just that one of the policemen, who kept his hands, richly tied, laughed. Then Martin came up to him and hissed through his teeth with an angry look, threatening him with his finger. "You're laughing, asshole. You're laughing." Then the policeman immediately removed the smile from his face. He caught the murderous stare of his superior. "I'm going to fire the hell out of this place," Martin shouted, waving his arms. Quickly they let her go. A mustachioed senior outfitter approached him, holding the serious Rose by the arm. "I'm going to ask you to calm down." Martin calmly said, "He know the situation is not easy, but your frustrated wife hit one of our employees. She'll have to come with us. This is outrageous. You know who I am. And you dare take my fiancée out of my wedding because she got drunk and accidentally hit one of your employees. See, that's how you want it. We're taking the girl to the station, just like her daughter. You can come in and post bail afterward to clarify the circumstances. All in accordance with applicable law. Please understand us too." Martin at first pouted his lips like a little child and then looked back at the incident with people looking at it from all sides. Thousands of cameras pointed at him, and now he was losing in this story. What kind of headlines would be in the papers? God, it's not hard to imagine. But the journalists would make something worthwhile out of it. Then Martin turned angrily back to the police chief. "Are you going to pay for this?" he said, stopping at every word. "And you?" he pointed at Agatha. "A terrible fate awaits you. Don't even think about getting rid of me." "Understood." Agatha looked at him with horror on her face and a hint of playfulness. She thought that she had won, that everything would be all right at last. How was she wrong? "When? Take her away," the irascible businessman asked impatiently. "Tomorrow morning," replied the warden, filling out some paperwork. Martin took a few steps away. He took one last look at these people who were taking his fiancée away and spat on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the clouds thickened and it began to rain. Many spectators began to disperse. The die-hard ones remained, eager for the story to continue. But they were quickly disappointed because Martin got into his car and drove away. Yep, put her in a police car too, and put her daughter in another, and they too departed. And Haji was lucky. She was sitting handcuffed in a car with this sergeant on duty, who helped her act out the whole thing. It was amazing. You have the right to remain silent, of course. A policeman has broken the silence. But I still risk to ask you, what did you want to marry forcibly? Agatha was a little embarrassed by such a question a couple of hours ago. She didn't even know the answer to it. She didn't know who she was, how she got here, how old she was. She didn't know anything, and that scared her terribly. But when Rose appeared, everything changed. It was as if her mind had sobered. She could think straight now, but still she didn't want to trust anyone yet. Trust had been eroded long ago. It was impossible to tell her story to a random person because everyone might not be who they seemed before. I started her even though I had no idea what to say. It's just been quite some time since the policeman asked that question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing is, my aunt wanted me to marry a wealthy man. And then this Martin Newman came along. I know he's given me the rest of my life, but I can't marry a man I don't love. And may I say, have you seen him at all? Yeah, he's a pimply old despot, God forbid. The sergeant laughed. He seemed to have exactly the same impression of the businessman. It's a case of take it or leave it, the guy said. Some people want money and fame, and some need simple family happiness. You are a young girl, but you already have a child, and certainly not from this despot. So whose girl is it? My husband. The girl answered thoughtfully. She was trying to come up with a true story. He died in an accident. I was only pregnant at the time. So you are a single mother? The girl nodded affirmatively. The driver saw it through the rearview mirror. I'm going to fire the hell out of this place, Martin shouted, waving his arms. Quickly they let her go. A mustachioed senior outfitter approached him, holding the serious Rose by the arm. I'm going to ask you to calm down. Martin calmly said he know the situation is not easy, but your frustrated wife hit one of our employees. She'll have to come with us. This is outrageous. You know who I am. And you dare take my fiancée out of my wedding because she got drunk and accidentally hit one of your employees. See, that's how you want it. We're taking the girl to the station, just like her daughter. You can come in and post bail afterward to clarify the circumstances. All in accordance with applicable law. Please understand us too. Martin at first pouted his lips like a little child and then looked back at the incident with people looking at it from all sides. Thousands of cameras pointed at him, and now he was losing in this story. What kind of headlines would be in the papers? God, it's not hard to imagine. But the journalists would make something worthwhile out of it. Then Martin turned angrily back to the police chief. Are you going to pay for this? He said, stopping at every word. And you? He pointed at Agatha. A terrible fate awaits you. Don't even think about getting rid of me. Understood. Agatha looked at him with horror on her face and a hint of playfulness. She thought that she had won, that everything would be all right at last. How was she wrong? When? Take her away, the irascible businessman asked impatiently. Tomorrow morning, replied the warden, filling out some paperwork. Martin took a few steps away. He took one last look at these people who were taking his fiancée away and spat on the asphalt. Meanwhile, the clouds thickened and it began to rain. Many spectators began to disperse. The die-hard ones remained, eager for the story to continue. But they were quickly disappointed because Martin got into his car and drove away. Yep, put her in a police car too, and put her daughter in another, and they too departed. And Haji was lucky. She was sitting handcuffed in a car with this sergeant on duty, who helped her act out the whole thing. It was amazing. You have the right to remain silent, of course. A policeman has broken the silence. But I still risk to ask you, what did you want to marry forcibly? Agatha was a little embarrassed by such a question a couple of hours ago. She didn't even know the answer to it. She didn't know who she was, how she got here, how old she was. She didn't know anything, and that scared her terribly. But when Rose appeared, everything changed. It was as if her mind had sobered. She could think straight now, but still she didn't want to trust anyone yet. Trust had been eroded long ago. It was impossible to tell her story to a random person because everyone might not be who they seemed before. I started her even though I had no idea what to say. It's just been quite some time since the policeman asked that question. Yes, you're absolutely right. The thing is, my aunt wanted me to marry a wealthy man. And then this Martin Newman came along. I know he's given me the rest of my life, but I can't marry a man I don't love. And may I say, have you seen him at all? Yeah, he's a pimply old despot, God forbid. The sergeant laughed. He seemed to have exactly the same impression of the businessman. It's a case of take it or leave it, the guy said. Some people want money and fame, and some need simple family happiness. You are a young girl, but you already have a child, and certainly not from this despot. So whose girl is it? My husband. The girl answered thoughtfully. She was trying to come up with a true story. He died in an accident. I was only pregnant at the time. So you are a single mother? The girl nodded affirmatively. The driver saw it through the rearview mirror. It seemed to him that a tear rolled down her cheek, but he didn't think it was necessary to pay much attention to it. The girl had an overabundance of emotion. It was an understandable reaction. Besides, in a couple of hours her stories and face would be all over the news channels. What kind of scandal would play out? But that would come later. And now they were driving under a passport gray sky, which mourned all the sorrows of the day. "By the way, you have not introduced yourself," informed the girl with some semblance of a smile. After a few minutes of silence, Tim also with a smile answered the guy he clearly liked where this dialogue leads. The girl only nodded. She did not give her name. So the surgeon had to feel awkward asking the question. "I told you my name. Would you like to tell me yours?" "No," Agatha answered tiredly. She was surprised at her own reactions. After everything she had been through, she could still communicate so calmly and even make jokes. "Nothing." The surgeon smiled. "I'll find out at the station. You can't hide anything from me there." They drove up to a building as gray as the Sutton weather. It was the police station. Agatha didn't want to get out of the warm car into the pouring rain. But she had to. Tim opened the back door of the car and offered her his hand, forgetting that the girl was handcuffed. She even grinned. Such forgetfulness of the guy, and he still somehow got her out of the car and let her into the building. Of course, he didn't have an umbrella, but he didn't need one. The lot was 5 meters away from them. The building was 3 stories high with lights on in almost every window. But it was the lowest floors that were the most stressful, the semi-basement behind bars and windows that looked out just a little bit. Agatha secretly hoped she was being led to the wrong place. But the line of her inner plea was not heard. Tim took her exactly to the basement. She didn't want to go down there, and the guy seemed to notice that. "Oh, it's not a prison. Nothing will happen to you," he reassured her and led her down a special dark staircase. When they arrived at the place, Agatha looked around. There were about 5 cameras in total, and only one of them had some girl in a black miniskirt sitting in it. She clearly looked special and with low social responsibility. Tim asked Agatha to take a seat on the bench, and he himself went to the table where his boss was sitting. He was a very overweight man in his mid-40s. He was holding a real cigar in his hands, huffing like a steam engine, filling out some documents by the light of a dim desk lamp. "Good afternoon. Peter brought the girl from that wedding. I suppose you've already been informed." The formidable man looked at him sidelong. He clicked his tongue and rolled his eyes. "Yes, my daughter was brought here. She was taken to another ward." He answered indifferently. "Which ward? How far from here? Tell me?" Agatha exclaimed in tears, approaching the chief's desk. "Lady, can you keep your temper?" The mustachioed man was indignant. Tim came to the rescue. He took Agatha aside and calmly explained to her, "Don't worry, your daughter is safe. She is on the 2nd floor where they keep street children. Tomorrow she will be dealt with by custody. No, they'll take her. Martin owns everyone in this town. Please don't give her up," Agatha begged. "Tim, come here. I found her papers," said the warden. Tim looked at the girl with a smile and then turned around and walked back to the desk. Agatha, 25 years old daughter, has no daughter. "Well, further you will familiarize yourself," ordered mustachioed uncle, and then sharply stood up from the table, although the concept of sharply for him was not suitable. His stomach was so huge that when he rose from the chair, he moved the table a couple of centimeters forward. He took his cigar with him and pronounced, pointing at Tim, "You all stay on duty, and I've got to go." After these words, he took another look around his favorite basement and then walked toward the stairs. His footsteps and readings could be heard until he stepped onto the flat surface on the 1st floor. Finally, Tim stayed here in charge. The guy walked up to Agatha and said, "Now I have to take you to the cell." "I'm sorry, you didn't apologize to me like that," said ironically a female voice on the right. It was the one who was now watching them with interest. Tim looked at her indifferently. Agatha only nodded. She didn't want to cause a scandal. That was the way it was supposed to be, and she was also pissed off by that upstart with the smeared makeup. When Tim led Agatha to the outermost cell, it then dryly spat after them. Agatha was shocked at this behavior, but tried to ignore it all. After all, Tim did. When he locked her in the cell, he went to the desk himself and began to study the documents. So, Agatha, and why is it written that there is no daughter? Marveled the guy. The girl wanted to answer, but then she was interrupted again from the neighboring cell. Donna walked because and did not want to admit. Then a vile laughter sounded. Here Tim could not stand it any longer, went up to this insolent blonde, looked at her with eyes burning with anger, and hissed through his teeth. One more word, dearie, and your temporary imprisonment here will turn into a permanent one. Believe me, I can make that happen. Oh, dearie, what are you going to do to me? The girl who laughed, the warden's giving you a command. You know who's running this, boss? Me too. That's why you're in the cage. Agatha joined the dialogue. And you shameful beggars didn't ask, but walked the child refused and still dares to arise, replied the blonde with pumped lips. How dare you bore? Agatha could not stand it. Tim sighed heavily. Then he reappeared in the dialogue. Then stop it, both of you. He growled menacingly. You turn to the girl of easy virtue. You will speak when asked clearly. Otherwise, every time I open my mouth, you will be fined for failure to observe public order. You will come out of here with debts that you can only pay off with loans. And you, Agatha, keep your temper, please. I'm asking you a question, answer, and don't lie, or it'll be worse. The blonde pouted her lips and sat down on the poplar tree in her cell. Agatha, on the other hand, simply nodded affirmatively. Tim sat back in his seat and continued his questioning. So where did the child come from? I will answer only to you in private. The girl answered confidently. Tim looked at her tiredly, then said, all right, then let's go to the meeting room. They will. It's like a miracle today, a real fairy tale, the blonde exclaimed. Tim looked at her menacingly, but said nothing. He was tired of arguing. In fact, he really wanted to sleep. The guy was completely unprepared for night duty. He hadn't gotten much sleep during the day because the neighbors with small children had been making noise all day. Either they were just mocking him, or they were really making repairs, while killing the kids who were screaming like crazy. At least that's how it seemed to him. Tim came to work a wreck. And of course, by the end of the day his mood was completely gone. He and Agatha came into the meeting room. The girl still doubted that there were no more employees, and she would really be alone with Tim. If anyone listened to their conversation, it would surely reach Martin's ears. But what if Tim was working for him too? She thought about it as she walked down the stairs. She'd have to lie again, but it was a lie. Must look very truthful in some of the details of her story. Still have to come clean. They finally reached the room. Tim closed the door. There was a dim orange light burning in the room, only faces were recognizable. They both sat down and the guy started his questioning. So now tell me whose child this is, and if you are the mother, because all the documents say otherwise. I used to believe official records, but now they don't inspire confidence. Convince me otherwise, it's Rose. My daughter answered Agatha. But the thing is, these documents are forgeries. I mean, remember when you asked me in the car about being forced into marriage? Well, Martin didn't recognize my child from a previous marriage. He made me new papers, and they didn't include my Rose. No mention of a first spouse either. He made it look like they never existed. But how very hard is that to do for falsifying documents? I'll remind you again, this is Martin Newman, one of the richest and most powerful men in our country. You don't think he's capable of document fraud? Yeah, for him it's like drawing a circle on a piece of paper. Tim was thinking. He began to check the documents, but found nothing in them that hinted at forgery. But what about it? I think we should call the warden. He knows how to deal with cases like this. Will he help? No, the girl interrupted him. You don't understand, he controls all the brass, all the police, even the media. He can shut everyone up. Yeah, I'm not so sure you don't work for him too. Tim's last words made me literally cringe. It was like he was terribly offended by that statement. So you don't trust me? But Agatha hesitated. Tim got upset, shook his head as if to show how disappointed he was, and then said, well, okay, I won't call my superiors. But then what should I do? In what way? The girl didn't understand him. Martin will come back for you tomorrow. He'll bail you out and take you to the registry office again. Then you can forget about your daughter. She will be placed in an institution." Agatha's head snapped up. Where can she hide? Where to go? She'll sit in a cage like a trained macaque until morning. And then she would be taken away and forced to marry again. And she had absolutely no idea what means Martin would use this time Tim. Begrudgingly, she began. Help me escape from here." "What from surprise?" the boy exclaimed. No one had ever dared to make such an impertinent offer to him before. "Please, how can I let you go? Are you out of your mind? No, I wouldn't risk my career for a dubious person trying to escape from her own wedding. If you are to marry him, then you will marry him," the boy answered firmly, though it was clear from his face that he didn't believe his own words at all. He just tried again to pretend to be an indifferent and rude boss. But deep down, he was still the same good and sympathetic guy. Agatha by Ace Book. Now she had lost all hope. Tim was right. If this was her destiny, then so be it. The policeman took the girl back to her cell. She was gloomier than a cloud. Tim said nothing to her and silently sat down at the desk to work. It was about 10 o'clock in the evening. The restless blonde was already asleep. Agatha lay silently staring at the ceiling for another hour. Different thoughts crossed her mind. She thought about her daughter, who had not even managed to do anything bad to anyone, and she was already forcibly separated from her parents. She thought about Martin, who was just a psycho, and it was obvious that after everything that had happened, he would take revenge. She reflected on how many lies had come off her lips, which he had told Tim about her bitter fate. Almost all of it had been lies. The boy glanced at her from time to time as he filled out the paperwork, but she continued to stare at the ceiling with a blank, broken look. After about 3 hours, Tim couldn't stand it any longer and approached the bars of Agatha's cell. She looked at him again with a painful, despairing look. And then Tim decided to do the terrible, terrible thing for his career of his life. It was a true miracle for the poor girl. He put the key into the lock and opened it. It fell to the floor with a clatter. Tim was startled. It was that the buxom blonde would wake up, but she was sleeping the dead sleep. The boy opened the creaking door and said in a whisper, "Come out." Agatha looked at him as if he were an angel from whom the light of hope and freedom emanated. She did not hesitate to step out into the open. Tim closed the cage and whispered, "Follow me. Follow all my instructions and we won't be noticed." The girl nodded understandingly and quietly followed her savior. They went up the stairs like mice, and when they reached the first floor, they heard someone's footsteps. Tim immediately pressed the girl against the wall, and himself went to the floor. There passed his work colleague, who was on duty on the first floor. "About what and you left?" joyfully said his friend. "And he himself is not happy about it," answered Tim, going as far away from the stairs as possible, as if casually. "Listen, where's that little girl we brought back from the wedding today?" pensively mumbled the guy with a smirk. "The daughter of that stunning hottie." "Yeah, well, settle your fantasies already. Where's the girl?" "She's probably asleep on the second one." "What do you want?" "The boss told me to talk to her, so I told Tim." "You picked a strange time to talk to a little girl. Those are the orders. You know, Peter, sometimes she talks a lot of crap." "Well, since she's asleep, I'll talk to her tomorrow morning." You, by the way, then early, interviewing her guardianship, wanted to take her away by 12. Dima noticed. "Okay, I'm off, since nothing else is going on. Time to hit the sack. Come on." Tim smiled. They shook hands and went their separate ways. Tim walked towards the stairs as if he were going back to his basement. But in fact, he just wanted to make sure that Agatha hadn't died of a heart attack yet. After those words from his coworker, her daughter was supposed to be taken to the orphanage tomorrow. For a mother, this must be her worst nightmare. "Agatha," whispered Tim, "are you like Roseher?" "No, we won't let that happen," the boy answered confidently. Agatha swallowed, coming to her throat. Calm, and nodded uncertainly. Tim took her hand. The hand was as cold as a corpse's. "It's because the basement is very damp and cold," Tim thought with pity. It would be easy to get sick down there. They went further upstairs, and on the way they met no one else. only an employee sleeping on a chair who was watching the children's ward, where the street children were kept until they were taken away by the guardianship. The man had dozed off, but could wake up at any moment. Tim prayed that door wasn't a cloud. He still had to get the keys in the keyhole. It seemed impossible. Heavy iron doors with a grated window. The guy realized there was no way around the distraction. He took Agatha aside and explained his plan. She supported him, and they began to act. The girl hid behind the information desk. Tim went up to the guard and touched his shoulder. He didn't wake up. Then the guy sighed and yanked him much harder. And only then the man woke up, slammed his eyes shut. He started looking around as if he didn't realize where he was. The man was completely disoriented in space and time. Sam exclaimed, "Tim, why did he fall asleep?" "I see, sorry." Colonel abruptly jumped up the man, presenting his hand to his temple. Only then did he realize he was talking to a regular surgeon. Tim rode, angry. "What are you going to do? And what are you doing at your desk?" "I'll tell the boss." "You're not a rat." "I know that for a fact. I'm not a rat. But if you want to keep sleeping, help me with the basement." "What's going on down there?" is Sam's less interested question. "Yeah, the batteries don't seem to be working. And you know it's still very cold. Especially in this fucking dungeon. I'll be in the hospital with pneumonia soon." "I don't know. I'm actually watching the kids here." "Oh, where are they going to go?" "You were asleep." "Come on. It'll only take 5 minutes just to figure it out. Give me a hand." I begged Tim. "All right." The man just took it off and followed his comrade downstairs. Tim also made a sign with his hand to Agatha as he left. Agatha made sure they had left and went to the door. She put the keys that Tim had given her in advance into the keyhole. The guy was lucky that his boss trusted him, so he gave him keys to all the departments and finally turned them. She entered a dark room, lit only by the warden's faint light. There were beds everywhere, but there were only 2 children in here, and one of them was her Rose. Agatha recognized her blood at once. The girl was sleeping very soundly. The mother did not wake her daughter up and frighten her. She knew that Rose does not wake up even from the sound of thunder and any noise. So she was sure that the girl would not wake up when she took her in her arms. And she was right. The girl didn't even move when her mother picked her up. She carried her baby out, closed the door, and hid behind the information desk again. A few minutes later, Sam and Tim returned. "I told you it wasn't the wiring." Disgruntled, the little man said. "Who knew?" Tim answered in a faintly sad voice. "No, you sure did. You're too young." Tim unfired. In the left, the man sat back in his seat and closed his eyes. "That's it. Tim, don't interfere with work," he said, realizing that the guy hadn't left yet. "Good night, Sam." Tim grinned. The man fell asleep quickly, and when Tim was finally sure, he called Agatha to him. She approached him on tiptoe, barely breathing and not making a sound. "Are you sure?" Tim asked confidently, opening the back door leading outside. The service exit for the dark alley employees, where everyone usually went down for a smoke. Agatha only nodded affirmatively. Then the guy opened the door for her, and she stepped out into the barely lit street. She turned around once more to say thank you with her eyes, and then she walked at a brisk pace, with the baby in her arms. But still, after a few seconds, Tim couldn't stand it and caught up with the girl. He was being pulled by some kind of force. He couldn't believe he was doing it himself, but now the guy actually felt some kind of concern for the 2 of them caught up in the jogging strap. He stopped her, touched her fragile shoulder. "Agatha, wait," he said almost in a whisper. The girl shuddered, turned around. There was consternation in her eyes and a maddening weariness. This night was definitely not for sleeping, but it was evident how weary she was. "Where are you going to go?" asked the boy. "Away from this place." Agatha replied indifferently. "You don't even know where to go." "I don't care. I just want to forget this story like a bad dream. I don't care if it goes to hell." Of course, she lied and lied about almost everything. No, she definitely had a plan. "Do you have a place to stay?" Tim asked. "No." "Do you have any money?" "No." After saying that, the guy was completely fenced in. It was as if he tasted victory, because he had already decided everything about himself the moment he let Agatha out of the cell. "Let me help you." Finally, shyly, Tim offered. Agatha looked him over from head to toe, then looked at Rose sleeping in his arms. She really had nowhere to hide right now. Martin would come in the morning and give chase. No matter how much she wanted to, she couldn't escape alone for sure. But you're risking your career. Maybe even your normal life. If Martin catches us, we'll be eaten to death, the girl explained. The cameras have already recorded everything. True, I've erased most of the footage from today. But anyway, I'm an accessory to this story now. And if I stay here, I'll be punished, of course. So I have nothing to lose. Let me help you. Agatha was silent. She did not understand why such generosity. But she didn't care about that now. All she cared about was where to hide. While she was pondering in one of the cars parked nearby, a horn sounded. She turned around. Tim was in it. "Did you want to walk?" he asked indignantly, lowering the window. Agatha shook her head. She went to the car, sat in the back, and tried to sag as low as possible in the seat, so that she could not be seen. Her daughter squirmed in her arms and mumbled something in her sleep. Tim turned on the headlights and drove out of the parking lot. The police station slowly moved away from them. Then it disappeared behind the clutter of sleeping buildings of the huge night metropolis. After a few minutes, Agatha asked the logical question, "Where are we going? To my apartment?" Or was she thinking of hiding from that oppressive dwarf? In a different and dirty bride's dress, Agatha only grinned. All the rest of the way they drove in silence. After a while, the car stopped at a gray, unremarkable building. If it weren't for the window with a light on the second floor, one would think that the building had been abandoned for a long time. So dirty and neglected was the facade and everything around it. Tim parked the car, and Agatha ventured to ask, without hiding her surprise, "Do you live here?" "Yes," he smiled embarrassedly. "I rent. But trust me, it's not as bad on the inside as it is on the outside." Tim got out of the car and opened the back door. Taking Rose in his arms, Agatha surprisingly easily trusted him with her daughter. Animal instinct told her that this simple guy posed no threat. He seemed remarkably honest and reasonable. Up close, the building looked even lousier. Some of it had peeled off and needed paint. Some of it was decorated with scarlet graffiti. The young men climbed the rain-wet stairs. Apparently the roof leaked somewhere and smelled of mold and dust. Finally, Tim opened the door to the entryway. It was pitch black inside. You could see absolutely nothing. But Tim didn't seem surprised at all. He stepped back a little and pressed the elevator button, an indicator that showed the floor. It was possible to navigate, and Agatha, too, moved toward the glowing displays. They went up to the top floor. It was almost as dark there, but the faint light of the street lamps still penetrated through the narrow, dusty window. While Tim was opening the door, Agatha touched Sunflower on the small windowsill. The pot fell and shattered. The boy looked at her with a stern and judgmental look. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. It was finally possible to enter the apartment. The light blinded Agatha's eyes, and she could not get used to it for a long time. Light after darkness was a new source of pain in her tormented head. She looked around the apartment. As expected, the rooms were rather shabby, and there was only one bedroom. A typical Khrushchev one-bedroom apartment for a single bachelor. In the kitchen, Agatha noticed a cockroach running around the table looking for food. She almost shrieked with horror. After all, she had always been afraid of these insects. "Oh, to something. It's Valurka. He has long lived here with me," calmed her hospitable host. "You give names to cockroaches." Agatha was amazed. "When you live alone, you can think of many," Tim grinned. He sat down on a chair at the kitchen table and gestured to his companion to do the same. But she looked around in fright, as if searching for someone where Rose was. Loudly and desperately she asked, "Hush, hush, don't shout. I put your daughter in my bed while you were looking around. Don't worry, there are no cockroaches on the couch." I looked into his blue eyes to make sure he wasn't lying. And only then could I sit down at the table. "Your name, right? Not Agatha." For so suddenly he had dumbfounded her with the question. Her heart raced. for what he had just said was absolutely true. She looked at him with eyes round with shock. I began, but Tim interrupted her. "Don't lie to me. Please." The girl fell silent. She hesitated to tell him the whole truth or not. On the one hand, he was a policeman who could easily turn her into the authorities. On the other hand, he helped her escape, took care of her daughter, and brought her home, risking everything. Those actions did inspire confidence. Agatha pondered for a moment longer, though she had long since made up her mind. And then she answered, "Yes, you're right. Say your real name, Emma." The guy, leaning on the back of the chair, either it was a gesture of fatigue or distrust. "Emma it is," he said thoughtfully. "Who came up with that? His father always had a fetish, but borrowed names." The girl was silent for a while, then inquired, "And how did you know that Agatha was not my real name?" "I just compared the two facts. The tattoo on your left arm speaks for itself, you know." Emma looked at her tattoo. It was in beautiful handwriting, spelled out in her name, though in English. It was a tattoo she had gotten back when she was 16, secretly from her parents. All because she argued with her friends. Yeah, and she kept doing it. You can't forge documents without changing your name. So it all really came together. "Yes, you have talent I do not deny." Smiled at the guy. "You'll have tea." The girl looked at him with eyes full of surprise. "Sorry, I'm not taught manners, but according to me, guests are always offered tea," said Tim. Emma nodded and stared at the wall. The two demons of whether or not to speak were fighting in her again. "There's something I haven't said yet," she began, "or rather, I lied to you about almost everything." "Everything? About what exactly?" Tim asked calmly, pouring tea. "About how I ended up here. The thing is, my husband isn't dead, and I don't have any aunt who wants to marry me off." "Then who are you?" "I'll tell you, only you sit down." The boy was worried and sat down on a chair opposite the girl. It was 6 months ago. It had begun. October then stood surprisingly warm, but a fine rain we grew almost every day. Wet yellow and purple leaves lay everywhere on the path. Emma and Alex were walking in the park, and their daughter was collecting beautiful leaves for a herbarium. "Mommy, look how many I've collected." Rose shouted with joy. "Well done, Sonny. Let's finish up. We'll go to meet your grandfather soon," said Emma. Daughter's fault. They played in the park for half an hour before heading to a restaurant nearby. Emma's father had invited them there. He hadn't seen his granddaughter for lunch in a long time and wanted to see her one last time before he left on a business trip to another country. He was a terrific journalist. He was always being invited to different countries for reports or interviews. The family walked up to a beautiful restaurant with panoramic windows that looked out directly onto a small lake. They were met by a friendly receptionist and led to the right table. Michael, Emma's father, was already seated at it. Grandpa willed Rose, throwing herself into the arms of the sturdy seventh man. The man even lifted the little girl in his arms. She laughed merrily with joy. Emma and Alex came up to them as well. "Hi, Dad," with a smile said the girl and kissed her father on the cheek. Alex shook his hand. Everyone sat down at a large table covered with a white, crisp tablecloth. "Darling, you look marvelous today. It's a milk dress. It suits you very well," Michael remarked. The daughter smiled in appreciation. Today, she had received 1,000s of admiring looks and compliments on her look. She always looked amazing. The shiny, brown, very thick hair alone. For what it was worth, the shimmering jewelry in her ears, on her fingers, and on her chest harmonized with her outfit. Her husband was proud that he had gotten such a beautiful and intelligent woman. Finally, they placed the order. They began to talk to each other. "So why did you invite us?" Emma asked her father with a smile. He was a little embarrassed by such a direct question, but still answered, "I wanted to see my granddaughter. And also to invite you to something else." "Where to?" Alex asked with interest. "The thing is that I'm leaving soon, and the other day I met an old friend here. You'd be surprised, because you've probably heard the name Martin Newman." Polyakov almost choked with admiration. Alex, Emma's husband, was also not averse to playing with adult toys. And in principle, this name was on everyone's tongue, yes, summed up Michael. We've been friends since university. Well, we haven't seen each other for a few years. The other day I was passing by some office and he came out. He recognized each other at once. We exchanged pleasantries, and I told him about my upcoming trip. Everyone listened to him with bated breath. He knows one of the richest and most famous people in the country, and we were definitely already stunned by such a surprise. Well, I invited him to celebrate our meeting to our daksha, Michael continued. And with you, my daughter, we have not talked for a long time. That's why I'm inviting you. The couple looked at each other. They were pleasantly pleased with this proposal. I think we can all get together this weekend. Finally, Emma replied. Her husband nodded his approval. But then they decided to wait for you at the cottage this Saturday, Michael said. He was delighted that the whole family would be together, and his old friend was coming too. Already on Friday, everyone started to get ready for the cottage. Honey, where did you put my blue shirt? Asked Alex from the other room. Emma answered the laundry, dressing my daughter in pajamas. Alex came into the room with the laundry. What am I going to wear tomorrow? He was indignant. Don't you have any more shirts? Nervously replied the wife. In the white one I'll look stupid, as if I want to show off in front of this Martin. Isn't that what you want? Emma said with a chuckle. The offended husband pouted his lips and slammed the door loudly. The girl laughed. Her husband's behavior was like that of a little boy who wanted to impress some girl. Emma put Rose to bed and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. She was already uncomfortable. She felt hot and cold. Her head rattled as if she'd been hit with rocks. The woman poured herself a glass of water and wrapped herself in the capital. It was at this time that Alex walked into the kitchen. He found a shirt that was to his liking and wanted to show off to his wife, but she didn't seem to care. And it's okay, he was worried. Just whether his wife knew or not. I feel really bad. She held her hands to her temple and rubbed her head. Nothing helped. Are you sick or what? Asked the worried husband. I don't know. Anyway, you can't cancel anything tomorrow. Father will be offended. I'll drink a fever reducer now. Hope it helps. Let's just call Michael and tell him we can't make it. You're his daughter. Wouldn't he understand? Especially if you suddenly gave him an infection before the trip. That's the kind of thing that'll make him resent you. Emma was silent. She looked down at the floor and thought about something for a long time. No, we're going. Rose really wanted to go, and so do you. I don't want to upset her. It's just a common cold. I just wore an open coat yesterday, she finally said. Well, I'm not going to argue with you. It's your decision. If anything, you'll lose it tomorrow at the cottage. Right? Yes, honey, Emma smiled. That's when they came to a final decision. The whole night Emma had nightmares. Her temperature was already 38 degrees. She decided not to tell her husband. He might not let her go. She wanted to spend time with her father and her family. The next morning, she felt better. Emma was even able to make her family a delicious breakfast of pancakes with condensed milk. How are you feeling? Asked Alex as they sat at the table. Good. I feel better already. But I think I'll have to stay home tomorrow, answered Emma. We'll arrange that, he promised. He hugged and kissed his beloved. Reluctantly, they packed their things and left the house. The journey amounted to 2 hours. They listened to music, talked, sang, played word games, and generally felt perfectly happy. Finally, they arrived at a wooden 2-story house in the old Russian style. Michael met them on the porch. Daughter, at last, he marveled. You are as beautiful as ever. And he was right. This day was no different from any other, because the subject always looked beautiful. Despite what she wore from her mother, she had inherited a perfect sense of style. Today, she was wearing a soft blue dress with a white scarf going on top of the accessory. She looked like a real lady. As Michael walked them into the house, he said, I marvel at you. You have a husband, a small child, a whole carload of responsibilities, and you still manage to look after yourself. Your daddy raised you right. That's a father. But I gotta tell you, that's not the point. It's just that I got a loving husband and an obedient child. That's the secret. The grown-up daughter smiled slyly, looking at her husband half-turned. She saw a faint smile on his face. It was very flattering for him to hear such words from his own wife. Martin was already waiting for them in the house, sitting at the large dining table and pulling up a beer from his mug. He didn't look like a rich man at all. He was dressed quite plainly in an ordinary black sweater jeans, but he had a great haircut. As soon as he saw the guests, he was showered with compliments, especially on the subject of "Oh, ma'am. You look stunning," he said, kissing her hand. This European etiquette surprised Emma very pleasantly. Her husband, on the other hand, did not like it very much. He immediately took his wife under his arm and led her to the opposite side of the table. False side of the table. "Yes, that's my little girl. You saw it," Michael bragged. "It sure is." Martin stretched out, looking at the angel on the ground. Emma noticed his gaze and smiled, but was a little embarrassed by the attention. Maybe she shouldn't have dressed up like that, but she always looked very stylish. And with her looks, she was always the center of attention. Rose had already run to her room where a lot of toys were waiting for her. On top of that, her grandfather had given her a whole dollhouse. "Mom, we will take this house home?" asked the girl. Mom tugged at the sleeve of her dress. "Honey, you come here often enough as it is. Why should we take it with us?" strictly answered the mother. I want to. The girl wouldn't stop. "But we'll give in," and her said already Michael with a smile asked you, "Daughter, your apartment is not small. Put it somewhere." Emma nodded and Rose immediately left her and ran to the second floor to play with her new gift. "Oh, those children," with a smile said Martin. "Do you have children?" Emma asked, stroking her husband's hand. "No," he smiled. "I didn't have a family. It was never going to work out." He sighed a little pretentiously. "At 45, I am still a bachelor." Unfortunately, such a career cannot dock it with a personal life. It's up to you what's best for you. "You're right," Alex answered firmly. He looked at Martin with a hateful look, which was very frightening. "We chose family and we don't regret anything." "And I'm very happy for you," Martin answered. There was a tension in the room. To ease the tension, Michael suggested that they go for a walk around the neighborhood. They went outside. His summer house was located in a rather large village, and the inhabitants of this village 30 years ago planted a beautiful avenue of different species of trees. There was a lot of wedge, so there were empty leaves growing, lying around at every step. "So what do you do, Martin?" asked Emma at last. She held her husband's hand, and the couple walked slowly down the alley. "A little bit of everything. But my main business is computer games. I created a company that produces new games. They're very popular. Oh, it would be cool to play." Emma marveled politely at one of them. She glanced over at Alex. He was walking glum and grim as a freight sky. "Yes, Alex." She turned to him. He nodded. "That's a great idea. We'll play tonight in the company of such a beautiful lady." "It will be lovely," Martin replied. With a meaningful smile, Emma replied with the same joyful expression. There was only one thing bothering her. Emma didn't understand his behavior. He was so eager to meet Martin, and now he was dirtier than a cloud. While Martin and Michael went on chatting about their own things, the girl stopped her husband and took him a little aside. "What's going on?" In a whisper, she asked him, giving Alex a stern look. "I have nothing going on, but you and Martin have something interesting going on." He muttered offensively. "How old are you?" Emma couldn't take it anymore and started whispering angrily. "What are you talking about? I'm only being polite. You should learn some manners from him too, shouldn't you? I haven't heard a single compliment from you in a month." "I've heard plenty from other people," cynically replied the husband. "Well, you know, Alex," Emma gritted her teeth and pushed her husband with her shoulder. She went out into the alley and ran to catch up with Michael and Martin. They stopped, as they were obviously waiting for the couple. Emma waved her handkerchief and made a happy expression, though deep down she wanted to cry. Why did she have such an unattentive husband? She'd had so many suitors, but she'd chosen him. Yes, he's a terrific father, but as a husband, he's always been passive, cowardly, and the little things. Every purchase that was meant for Emma, she paid for it herself. Alex couldn't be expected to do anything, or he had a debt to pay, or the wrong time, or some other apocalypse. Emma was getting tired of it, but there were advantages to the marriage. First of all, the wonderful pedigree and genetics. Rose was smart beyond her years, and she was beautiful. Secondly, not everyone could afford a house in the city center, but thanks to Alex, it was possible. Not that Emma married him for the money, but for true love. It didn't smell like it. Some people will say, "How can you marry at 18?" And they'll say you can. But with age, preferences can change. There's nowhere else to dress. Divorce will hurt the baby. Your whole life will go down the drain. So Alex, we tried to maintain an even relationship with each other, although often there were domestic quarrels between them. "Where do you disappear, dear Emma?" Martin asked. "We've missed you already." "I'm sorry, for God's sake." She started to justify herself to my husband. She turned around to look for support, but Alex was gone. Fell into a ditch. Martin finished for her, laughing. "I don't know," Emma said thoughtfully, trying to hide the tears that came to her eyes. They walked for another half an hour. During this time, they discussed fishing, career, family. In general, everything that could be discussed. It was getting close to evening, and dinner wasn't ready yet. Everyone had to go back to the house to start the preparations. Emma took over the chicken with the two soldiers. Martin volunteered to help cut up the groceries. Alex was nowhere to be seen. Emma asked her daughter where her father had gone, but she said she hadn't seen him since they had come in here. It wasn't like him, but there was nothing to be done. Salads don't make themselves. You can cook too. Emma marveled. When Martin helped her make the sauce for the chicken. That's a very strange misconception. Did you know that millionaires can't cook? Martin grinned. It's the cooks who make everything for them. I lived a very ordinary life as a child. And in my student years, I made such culinary masterpieces in the dormitory. Why did you ask your father? He admired them the most, Martin said with a laugh. Liar, you bastard. He went into the kitchen. Michael? No, I won't argue. Your pasta was really good, but the pizza. Did you kill her? The man. It wasn't my fault, it was the oven. Justified the famous businessman. All three of them laughed out loud. They didn't like Martin's company. It was an adult, self-confident person who was ready to tease and laugh at himself, not her Alex, to whom you say a word, and then you have to open the window from his heartfelt remarks. But it should be noted that Martin attracted Emma not as a man, but rather as an older relative. Let's say a jolly uncle, almost a brother to her father. He was positive, friendly, and caring. When Emma had another headache, he kindly offered her some imported pill that was supposedly very good. She regarded the gesture as a sign of politeness and courtesy, but Martin seemed to think otherwise. He repeatedly tried to touch her hand, catching her eye, giving her frank compliments. Eventually, Emma began to tense up, but she put it down to the amount of alcohol she had drunk. The wine they consumed while preparing dinner. Quite a lot indeed. Alex came in when they were finishing dinner. Rose had long since gone to bed. Oh, Alex cheerfully greeted him with a tipsy Emma. So where have you been? My darling, we've already moved on to dessert. Alex looked at everyone with a disgruntled look and stopped his number. He looked at him as if he was about to throw a knife at him and kill him. Yes, indeed, you've been on something of a bender. Laughed the businessman, who was terribly drunk. And then Alex saw what he expected and feared. Martin stroked Emma's knee. She took his hand away every time, and he put his palm on her leg again and again. The woman only smiled politely. She wasn't as drunk as this millionaire and realized he was doing something wrong. As soon as Alex saw these signs of attention from Martin, immediately rushed across the table to this underhatch. He hooked his arms around his neck, causing both of them to collapse on the floor. Emma screamed and urged her father to intervene, who was also drunk and struggling to comprehend what was happening. A real fight broke out between Martin and Alex. They began to beat each other right on the floor. But of course, Alex won, because he was completely sober, which is not to say that Martin is much younger than his opponent. The businessman's broken nose was bleeding. Emma screamed louder and louder. Alex lost his shattered fist. At this point, Michael had already woken up and rushed to separate the fighters at the screams. Frightened Rose, As soon as the girl saw this outrage, she too screamed thinly and loudly. Emma ran up to comfort the poor little girl. She took her to the second floor and tried to put her to sleep again. "Mom, Uncle Martin, he's alive," Rose asked fearfully. "Of course, he just had a bad fall. And Dad and your grandpa are trying to help him now," lied Emma with a smile. She felt a throbbing pain in her head. Her temperature seemed to be rising again. Whether it was from the stress she had been under or some other reason, the process had intensified. After 10 minutes, Rose was finally able to doze off. When her mother was sure of this, she left the room and carefully closed the door. Downstairs, everything was quiet. Emma was afraid to go back downstairs. She was afraid of seeing something else scary. The first floor was as quiet as a graveyard. It was frightening and intriguing at the same time. Emma walked downstairs and into the dining room where everything happened. To her relief, there were no bodies here, except that Martin was missing. Alex was sitting with a piece of ice on his forehead. Michael was sitting across the table, staring at the table. He was as if in a trance, although it was only alcohol intoxication. "Where's Martin?" "Concerned?" Emma asked, approaching her husband. "And you're only interested in him again?" Alex answered angrily. Were his eyes blazing with rage? "No, he just left," interrupted her father. "As soon as I got him up, he took his things, got dressed, and went out. How could you send him away in this rain?" Emma was outraged. "And the fact that he attacked you in front of me didn't bother you at all? Or don't you care that you have a husband?" "Oh, I'm sorry, he's so rich. Surely he could provide himself a brilliant future." Alex was outraged. "What are you talking about? He was drunk." Emma defended Martin. "That's an excuse. Now you're going to make excuses for him. Even though what he did was ridiculous, he treated me with respect. I've never heard so many compliments from you in my life. And he said so many nice things in one night, and for those nice things. Were you ready to sleep with him? My husband couldn't take it anymore. I didn't expect that from you." With these words, Alex stood up, took his coat, which was hanging on the back of his chair, and left the house. Emma rushed after him, but she could only see the glint of headlights running away into the darkness of the night. "Yes," Michael said. "I didn't expect such a turnaround from this evening." "Daddy," cried Emma, like a little baby. "What am I going to do now?" She collapsed to her knees and covered her eyes with her hands. Only her faint whimpers could be heard. Then she smelled the odor of booze, and then a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Go to bed quietly," her father said. "You're all hot. You need to go to bed. Tomorrow we'll deal with everything." The girl looked into his eyes, which always possessed some soothing magic of a kind of support. She immediately found a sober mind, got to her feet, and sprinted to the bedroom. "The morning is wiser in the evening." This phrase fit the current situation very well. In the morning, Emma woke up to a wild pain in her head. The first thing she did was to go into Rose's room, much to her dismay. She didn't find her there, but Emma thought it was all just a glitch. Because of her illness, surely her daughter must be downstairs having a quiet breakfast. She decided to go downstairs to the kitchen too. She was thirsty. She was thirsty. Looking out the window, she noticed that her father's car was missing. Concerned, she went out on the porch, looked around, and saw a note carefully taped to the wooden door. It said in sloppy handwriting, "We're off with Rose to change the tire. We'll be back later tonight. We're going for a walk. Don't miss us." That short note was definitely written by the father. He was the only one who could put it down like that without any embellishments. Quick, clear, and to the point. She took it for granted. She went back upstairs to her bedroom. She was worried about Alex. He hadn't been online since last night. What if something had happened to him? He'd left in a state of complete rage, angry about where he was going. Left his daughter, his wife, his stuff, just up and left. Emma decided to take her mind off things, sighed, and turned on a TV show. An hour passed, 2, 3. She seemed to fall asleep, and when she woke up, it was already late afternoon. Father and daughter were still gone. 3. The subject matter kept escalating. She had already written 1,000 voicemails to her husband. He never made contact, She poured herself some chamomile tea and wanted to go to her room again, but suddenly she heard the key turning in the door. Emma was frightened for some reason and immediately hid. The feast was in the kitchen. The sound was unlike the usual sound of her father opening the door, more like when a lock is picked. Maybe Dad had lost his keys, but why would he break down his own door? He would call Emma. Then the frightened woman decided to cautiously look out the window. She squatted down and peered out from behind the bollard. An ambulance with blue lights was standing outside, but the lock was indeed being tried by some men. Emma was terrified, but she tried to keep her wits about her. She quietly went up to the second floor. She locked herself in her bedroom and started calling her husband. He was out of range as usual, so she had to record voice messages on the answering machine. "Honey, I know you're mad right now, but I have to tell you right now I'm home alone. Everyone's gone somewhere. There's people banging on my door." She hesitated as she heard a loud conversation on the first floor. She realized that these people were able to break into the house, so her mother decided to prop her door open with at least a bollard. That would hold them off for a while she did so. At the same time, she continued to talk into the phone. "They're already here. They broke into the house. I think it's Martin. God, I'm so scared. Were you right, Alex? Where the hell are you?" She shrieked into the phone when she heard the terrible stomping. They were quite close. Emma pressed send on the message and tucked the phone into the pocket of her robe. She was already prepared for the attack. She moved as far away from the door as possible to the window and armed herself with a table lamp. A moment later, 2 men in black balaclavas burst into the room. They looked like the very real robbers. Only they weren't after jewelry, they were after a living person. Behind her, one approached, and Emma tried to hit him with her weapon. But this guy seemed to be a good shot and almost immediately knocked the lamp out of her hands. She found herself unarmed. Within moments, something was injected into her hands. A cold liquid spread over venom. After a couple seconds, Emma's eyes ran out and she collapsed to the floor unconscious. One guy threw her onto his shoulder and went to the exit. There, an ambulance was already waiting for them there, with Martin as the head doctor. This car was just a disguise, and for the neighbors, so that they would not ask unnecessary questions, and further told Emma Tim, taking another sip of black tea. Everything was like a fog. They kept me on some kind of drugs for 6 months. I couldn't walk, talk, or even think for myself. I remember it all like a blackout. It was a living hell. You wouldn't wish it on an enemy. But on the day of the wedding, apparently they lowered my dosage. So when I saw Rose, the girl hesitated. It was as if some gears were turning in her head. She looked carefully at the table, at her hands, and only then raised her eyes to Tim. "Wait," she stretched out. "How did my Rose show up at the registry office?" Here Tim became nervous. On his forehead, protruded under his breath, became cleared. It was all very visible. Tim called out to him Emma in horror. She tensed up too. God, this guy must be one of their gang too. She felt sick to her stomach and her eyes darkened. "I'm in on the story too." Finally, he confessed. "But don't be frightened, please. I'll explain it all to you now. It was a month ago. I was called on duty to a bar. A police car with blinkers stopped at the door of the bar. Tim got out, tired from his night shift. He saw a drunk who 2 guards were trying to kick out, but they were having no luck. The 3rd guard was already lying on the floor with a bloody nose. That's why the police were called. Tim drew his service weapon leisurely. He approached the drunkard, who was yelling some threatening speeches, and sharply pulled him by the sleeve. He almost fell down, having lost his balance for a couple of seconds. "Come with me," strictly said Tim Yanchik, and slowly turned around with a haughty grin. Said, "And who are you anyway?" Tim didn't bother with him. Shot him in the air. Sobered up and recognized the approaching man as a police officer. Then he turned the man around and was about to handcuff him. Suddenly the drunk kicked him hard in the crotch. Tim was writhing in pain. And at the same time, the scoundrel snatched a gun from him and began to threaten everyone around him. The guards stopped being brave and put their hands behind their heads. And who knows what would have happened if not for one guy who happened to be passing by. He quickly oriented himself, took a heavy rock from the flower in front of the bar, and smashed it on the madman's head. But he did it so carefully that the alcoholic only collapsed to the floor. There was no unconsciousness, no blood, no death. It was just that the young drunk was now lying on the pavement. As soon as Tim got up, he twisted the man around, and he and the guy shoved him into the car after they had done all the paperwork. Tim motioned for the guy to step outside for a smoke. "Thanks for your help. I really did." "I could have gotten fired for being unprofessional," Tim said. "He's lighting a cigarette. What's your name for?" "What?" the guy asked. "Tim, just Tim to you. I'm Alex. What are you doing here?" That's how they met. Alex told everything about his life to his stolen wife, and that damned thing. When I got that message, Alex told him then, my heart just sank. I was ready to kill myself. You know, I'm an idiot. I left my wife in that position, and now she's been stolen right from her father's house, he lamented. Of course, at that moment I was terribly frightened and started urgently calling my father-in-law. "Michael Nikolaevich, your daughter Emma?" "God, she was kidnapped," shouted Alex into the phone. He was rushing around in circles from place to place, not knowing what to do. More than 12 hours had passed since he'd left home. He was now 2 hours away from this house. There was silence on the phone. Finally, Michael was able to pull himself together and answer. "Where did the information come from?" "She sent me a voicemail. She suspects Martin." Even through the phone you could hear it. Michael's heavy breathing. He was thinking. On the information he had just received. "Where are you now?" Finally, the man outside his house asked. "I left here yesterday and go to the airport right away." "Martin will definitely go there. He lives in Washington, after all." "Rose and I will be there in about an hour. Keep us posted." "Yes, sir." Alex didn't know why he called his father-in-law sir in a moment of danger, but that was Michael's command. He had to become an officer, not a journalist. The boy followed every instruction. He rushed at full speed to the airport and prayed that the Martin had not yet left. He didn't make it. When Alex asked the flight attendant where the plane from flying to Washington, she answered him that the last flight for today was completed. But Alex was not interested in that. Through the panoramic windows of the airport he saw the plane, near which was parked a rather familiar expensive car Martin. The guy almost bruised his legs trying to get out. And he succeeded. Poor tried to stop him, called security, but Alex was already running at full speed to his beloved. He jumped out on the takeoff field and ran as fast as he could, like a good sprinter. The plane was about 50 meters away. He personally saw his poor wife being carried on a stretcher into the private plane. Behind her, Martin's Archer came in and times her. He even seemed to smile evasively at Alex before disappearing from sight. But Alex kept on fighting. He ran and ran as fast as he could. But the nasty time was failing him. It was only a couple of meters away from the plane, which had already removed the ramp and was starting to turn its propellers. As it moved from the place and rolled down the runway, and the police were rushing towards Alex. And instead of helping the man who had his wife stolen, they began to beat him with batons. Alex fell on the asphalt. He was panting. Michael's voice was heard screaming. "Stop," but they continued to beat him until he lost consciousness. "I came out of the medical coma they put me in to survive only 2 months later." Alex continued, telling the story. "It took a few more to recover. As soon as I could walk again. Immediately I sprang into action and am still looking for ways to save my wife. I'm sure you Timka knows the bloody fiend. I don't know him personally, but the whole town's talking about him. He's getting married soon." And then Tim stopped talking. He put all the puzzles together in his head. "So it's a wedding?" The policeman was amazed. "Yes, with my wife," Alex said bitterly, "and I'm trying to find a way to prevent it." There was a long silence. And after a few minutes, Tim said, "So listen to me carefully. I have a plan." "And what's next?" Emma asked. She liked the denouement of the story more and more. Now her passive husband played not the least role here. And then it's business as usual. Alex brings her daughter, tells her what to do and how to do it. She's a fighting girl. I'll tell you, so small and so fearless, just fire, not a little girl. Admired Tim Rose. So she bursts into your wedding. And then you know the rest, Tim replied, and exhaled with relief. It was like a weight off his shoulders. But how could it be? I mean, you convincingly didn't believe me, did you? Said Emma. But that was the whole point. You weren't supposed to know all the cards, not while we were in danger. But I don't believe you risked your life and career for a mere passerby who saved my life. Notice, Tim replied with a smile. It still doesn't add up for me. Where is your husband then? You'll find out tomorrow. After all, tomorrow will be an unforgettable day for you. Too intriguing, said Emma. I'm so tired of all this. Tim only shrugged his shoulders. In response, they drank tea in silence and went to bed. Tim gave the girl his old shirt and shorts. The torn white dresses were thrown in the trash. Those he had to sleep on the sofa in the kitchen. But most importantly, Emma was now able to feel safe and comfortable. It had been a long time since she had felt neither where she slept nor how she did it. She was held as if in a fog. Right now, her head was splitting open, and every muscle felt like it was being twisted, pulling at her with a nasty pain. But this is a strong woman. I ordered myself not to think about the pain. The most important thing was to get out of this foreign, hostile city. To get home. To save herself and her daughter. It no longer seemed strange to her that she was sleeping in a strange man's bed, in a strange shirt, missing men's cologne. The main thing now was that she felt alive, an almost sober mind, her own thoughts. How wonderful that was. She would probably have to undergo special treatment to get rid of the remnants of this crap she'd been fed. But she'll get through it all. For herself, for her family, for her daughter. The next day, Emma woke up with terrible anxiety and a dry throat. She drank some water, but it wasn't enough. Her head ached terribly. She looked in the mirror. A layer of anal cream overnight had wiped away everything. And now the pronounced bruises under her eyes could be seen. No, they weren't bruises from her dosage, but from the drugged doorman. She felt absolutely shattered. Emma saw Tim, who had just gotten up from the couch. He too had a glass of water and then walked over to her. Yeah, the guy stretched out. You look like hell, sis. How are you feeling? My head is pounding, admitted his guest. Oh, that's a manifestation of drug addiction for sure. But don't worry. You don't need an extra dose for that. There are more humane methods. Like what? Emma asked with interest. A silly joke. Repented immediately, Tim. I don't know exactly what to do in such cases. But I have a gift from my grandmother. She collects all kinds of herbs from my grandmother. She gives it to me whenever we see each other. When he said that, his eyes shone with real love and warmth. I took out a jar of herbs from the cupboard and brewed it all over the kitchen. Immediately, the amazing aroma spread, fresh, leathery meadowgrass and berries of some sort. The two of them finished the whole mesmerized. The kettle, designed for 6 cups if diluted with boiling water. And it did help. And Rose woke up and immediately ran into the kitchen. Mommy, are you here? We made it. Really, now we're going home. My daughter Emma hugged her brave and little. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's okay, Mom, replied this amazing child and affectionately rubbed her cheek and Mommy's hand. Oh, here comes our savior, winked Tim at her. Grab the yogurt in the fridge, and let's go. Run where? Emma suddenly asked. What do you mean? Do you have a meeting today? Tim smiled enigmatically. Tim, what kind of meeting? Get cleaned up, and you'll find out. Emma obeyed the boy and went to her room to get dressed. Only then did she realize that her clothes weren't even here. She, embarrassed, walked into the kitchen again. Woo, I thought you weren't coming. Okay, not a funny joke, Tim said. I'm not very good at jokes, if you've noticed. Anyway, I got myself a dress for the occasion. A little birdie whispered that you're very fond of blue. Emma nodded affirmatively and continued to listen attentively. Put on a tracksuit and a jacket. You'll find them in my closet. There's nothing else feminine in there. And a hat low over your eyes for 2. And let's go to the meeting. We've been waiting a long time, and she suspected who she was going to meet. Inwardly, she prepared for a very serious conversation. She and Alex had left on such a terrible note, and it had been more than 6 months. Emma put on everything they had prepared for her and walked back into the kitchen. Rose had already eaten her yogurt and was ready for a new adventure. But how do you see? Fidgeting in front of her, having changed into this too. Seeing him, Emma just awed in her understated pants. The fat one with the graffiti pattern carelessly shifted, the cap worn backwards. Now he looked more like a street hooligan than a law enforcement officer. With a suit like that, I'm not likely to be immediately recognized as a fugitive cop. He laughed, seeing Emma's bewildered look. "Where are we going?" she asked, recovering from the culture shock. "There's a great cafe not far from here," Tim answered cheerfully. "That's where we're meeting." When they left the apartment, Tim checked several times to make sure everything was turned off. And then he brought a huge backpack full of things. As they walked down the stairs, Mom decided to ask why you need so much stuff in the cafe. The boy was surprised. "This, alas, is not a cafe. I just forgot to warn you. We're not coming back here again. Now not only Martin, but the entire city police force is looking for us. The first thing they'll do is visit my apartment, so I'm not coming back here." "Well, where are you going to go?" The girl Emma wouldn't stop. "Stop asking questions. Please." "All in good time. You'll find out soon enough." They entered an American-style diner. Emma felt like the heroine of a soap opera, although her life for the last 6 months had been somewhat of a horror movie. A hostage victim. Kept on drugs for 6 months. She felt sick when she remembered it. No sooner had they approached the table than Rose burst forward screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." "I'm back." Everyone in the cafe turned to them. Alex only smiled at everyone and sat the restless daughter on his lap. Now it was Emma's turn. When their eyes met across her body, goosebumps ran down her body. She held her breath, and then Alex enclosed her in a tight embrace. They didn't say a word to each other, but it was clear enough. "So I don't want to interrupt your happy reunion, but let us rejoice afterward for a while," Tim interrupted them embarrassedly. "You're attracting too much attention, and we're running out of time." The couple sat down at the table, and Tim sat down with them. "Alex," he said quietly now and then. "Emma," as if that name held the deepest meaning. "How are you, my poor girl? I missed you so much." Barely holding back tears, replied Alex. "I'm so sorry we didn't that night." The guy cut him off. "Don't blame yourself for anything. I was the one who was wrong. If only I hadn't left that lousy night." "Oh, well, we'll talk about it later. I'll tell you one thing. These terrible months have made me realize one thing. No matter how much we fight, no matter how many misunderstandings, it happens to everybody. What matters is that we have each other. I'll never leave you again. You should know how much effort I spent trying to get here, and I got here to save you. Whatever it cost me." Terrific speech. "Ironic," said Tim. "The Oscar bro will rehearse another time. Right now our problem is we're running out of time. And you still haven't told her about our plan. The thing is," began Alex, addressing his wife, "that they won't let us out of town for nothing. We are wanted. To be exact, you, Rose, and Tim. That's why Tim and I have devised a whole plan." Alex leaned even closer so that the plan could not be heard by prying ears. However, here in this noisy second-rate diner on the outskirts, they had no fear of stalkers. "There's a van in the backyard. It's got ice cream on it. To get out of here without being seen, I took out a sole proprietorship. Basically, pretend I'm a real entrepreneur, driving freight, all that stuff. Unload the whole van. There's a refrigerated truck full of ice cream, and it's got a secret section. Your father and I set it up. They're opening it up. Check, please. It's filled with boxes of ice cream. It's like a refrigerator on wheels. But you're comfortable and warm inside. You'll see, once we're all loaded, I get in the driver's seat and calmly drive us to where we'll start our new life." The plan was as foolproof as a Swiss watch. All the characters in this story played their roles brilliantly. Rose, Emma, and Tim took refuge in the trailer, piled with boxes of the most authentic ice cream. Alex got behind the wheel. Inside the passenger compartment, everything was furnished like in the smallest hotel room. There were bunks, a mini kitchen, and a toilet. You could live here for years if you needed 5-star comfort. Rose was absolutely delighted. "It's just a shame you can't see out the windows." She complained a little, but then she got better. but we'll go as real spies for the ladies." Emma smiled at her daughter. She was glad this whole nightmare was finally coming to an end. "How did you ask her Tim after hours on the road?" "I'm good. I mean, I still want to dose, but I realize it's an addiction. I'll get there as soon as I can. I'll see a doctor." Then they slept. Then they stopped somewhere and slept. Alex to take a break. It seems that after almost a full day's journey, they were already approaching familiar homelands. "We are already in Utah," Alex joyfully informed them at the next stop. Suddenly, at some point in the journey, the truck accelerated sharply. It was very noticeable. The passengers in the trailer got worried. Tim tapped Alex on the wall. He opened a secret window between the cab and the body. "Alex, where are you going so fast? We're getting there." "Unfortunately, we are not alone. We have time for everything," nervously answered Alex, pressing the gas even more. "We are being chased." "Hold on, don't panic. That's for sure." There were Martin's men. They were following them in a huge armored jeep, and after a while, they started shooting at the tires. That's when it got really scary. "Emma, take Rose and hide behind the closet. Make a barricade of pillows," Tim ordered. While they were doing that, Tim pulled his service gun out of his pocket, causing Emma to have a real nervous breakdown. "What is that?" screamed she. "Gun. Unless you want to die, you're going to have to choose either their life or yours," Tim replied firmly. A real firefight broke out. Alex and Tim were shooting back from the cabin. Emma plugged Rose's ears with her hands and shook in the inner trailer. She smiled at her daughter and told her everything was fine. Alex continued to increase speed, trying to get away from the pursuers, and it seemed that everything was already over. On the narrow mountain serpentine, it became quite bad. The long truck was being tossed back and forth at breakneck speed. Emma prayed silently that they wouldn't drive off the cliff. And then she heard a familiar, nasty voice from the loudspeaker stop the car. "If you don't want to get hurt," it was Martin. Was he there too? And we were very surprised to hear that. It's a pretty dangerous race. Wouldn't he be sorry to risk his life? He'd send his thugs away from them. But the question was unanswered, and the truck accidentally crashed into a roadblock. They rammed the back of the truck and boxes of ice cream spilled onto the road. But that's nothing. At high speed, the truck hit a lamppost, which collapsed right onto the road. It didn't just block the path of Martin's car. It knocked her serpentine. The car dangled for a full minute, spinning and wheeling helplessly over the precipice. And then it went down. There was a massive explosion. Our fugitives watched in complete prostration. Shocked by this outcome, they all ran out of the van to see what had happened to the pursuer's car. And it seems that now these scary people no longer posed any threat to them. "Oh my God, Alex!" I squealed, either from joy or shock. "Emma, what have you done? What have we all done? What's going to happen now?" The boy was tensely silent. He realized for himself what had just happened. It could certainly be considered an unintentional murder, unless one knew the full background of the events. And if you did, then it was a planned murder. That's a whole different story. "Let's get downstairs," screamed Emma in a panic. Maybe they can still help her as best they can, trying to calm her down. "Emma, they can't be helped. They're all dead. Now that creep won't hurt you anymore." No moaning. "Anna, no, it's not that wrong. We didn't mean to. We couldn't kill them. If we hadn't killed them, they would have killed us." Didn't blink an eye. Tim continued to stand his ground. A few minutes later, they called the rescue services. Those, of course, arrested the driver of the perpetrator of the whole situation and safely took him to the police station. Tim, and almost unhinged from terror, the young mother and her daughter were driven to Emma and Alex's home in the center. Alex's trial was not scheduled until 2.5 weeks later. During this time, Tim and Emma visited him every day. In one of those visits, Emma suddenly realized that she really loved her husband. She doesn't need a divorce to settle domestic disputes. And she's not a coward at all to just run away from her problems now. "What's the best shirt for me to wear?" she asked Tim, who was finishing the coffee in her kitchen. "They're all the same." The guy shrugged. "What's the point?" Emma couldn't take it anymore. This one's milky, and this one's pure white. Tim took another look at the shirts. To him, they were exactly the same. But he tried to lie. Well, take the right one, it's white. She, on the contrary, is milky. Nervously uttered the girl. She had already resigned herself to the fact that Tim thought absolutely nothing in style and colors. Case number 320 is being heard. Monotonously pronounced the judge. The defendant is accused of premeditated murder of several persons. All the victims died as a result of a traffic accident. The trial lasted 2.5 hours. During all those long and crawling hours and minutes, Emma never once left the courtroom. She was terribly worried about the fate of her husband because her own life depended on it. Alex was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 7 years in a penal colony of general regime. And it seemed that she was about to faint from these cruel phrases. But I think she expected that. She obediently listened to the verdict and left the courtroom with the others on wooden legs. But once at home, she was pissed off badly. How on earth could a man be given 7 years in prison on the condition that they chased him and threatened his safety? Well, first of all, the court doesn't know anything about it, Tim explained to her. And there's no need for this psycho to know. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of associates left. I don't know. They know less, as they say, they sleep better. And Alex, willingly or unwillingly, killed them. So everything is fair here. The girl turned to him unhappily and looked straight into his eyes. You are now, by the way, sitting on his favorite chair. Honey, please be reasonable. Dad stood up for Tim. I understand the stress you've been under. It's terrible. We thought we'd lost you forever. But please understand, Alex was put away for a reason. People died because of him. No matter how bad they were still people. Emma sat next to her father on the couch and pressed her body against his. Then she whimpered into his sweater like a little girl. She wanted so badly to feel the warmth of a loved one beside her. But the most beloved person today was not here. And that's terrible. Handing it in. Finally, the deadline approached and Emma was able to visit her husband. The prison was quite large. When Alex was brought out, she was pleasantly surprised. He looked quite neat in his striped robe. Alex sat down across from her and picked up the phone. Emma couldn't contain her feelings and cried. How are you doing, honey? She asked. It's pretty normal for a prison. I'm not being starved or beaten, so I'm not suffering. How are you doing? We're fine. Rose goes to daycare. I miss bringing Rose here too. I don't want her to grow up without a father. Besides, they say you can get parole if you behave yourself. I'll do my best. That's when they said goodbye. They only had a few minutes to talk. It was very upsetting for Emma. But she was told they gave her more time at lunchtime. The next day, her father called her with a very strange proposal. Honey, I want to make a movie about you, he said about me. Emma was surprised. About all the horror you've been through. Come to the studio today and we'll discuss everything there. And indeed, Michael decided to release not exactly a movie, but a TV show where Emma would tell the whole country all the details of the nightmare, and then their consequences. This program instantly gained millions of views and became very popular. The case of Emma and Alex received wide publicity, and in a few months under public pressure, the court decision was changed. And Alex was finally able to be home with his family and even received compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Daddy, Daddy, Rose shouted when she was finally able to see her birth father alive and well. Now they were recognized on the streets. Books were written about their plight, and even movies were made. Emma's story has touched the hearts of many, many people. Some found in it motivation for themselves. Others offered support for Emma herself, who had been through such an ordeal. Here's what respondents to a small survey once said in the studio on a talk show. Emma's story inspired me to be braver, to not be afraid of my own prejudices. After all, if she could get out of the hands of such a villain, out of such hopelessness, then I can solve my problems. They're nothing compared to her family's. And that was the end of it. Tim forever became a full-fledged member of the family Oi, named Brother Alex and favorite Uncle Rose. He retired from the authorities and together with Alex. On the warm southern shores, Alex's travel business. we began to quarrel much less often, and we cemented our union with the birth of another child, and Emma's father became well known and achieved great success in his profession.